Good afternoon. It's September the 13th, and I hope everyone is enjoying this fall weather that we're having. It's said it was going to be 90 today, so I didn't go outside at all. I wanted to call the meeting of the Charlotte City Council for this day, September the 13th, to order and welcome everyone that's joining us. Mr. Woods, we're going to have to go through a few other steps before we get to you, so if you want to put Gene Woods on your screen and do other things for a few minutes, we can pull you back up. So it's just up to you, okay? All right. Tonight's meeting is being held as a virtual meeting in accordance with the electronic meeting statutes, and all those requirements of the statutes are being met through electronic means. Everyone is able to join us or view this meeting on the government channel, the city's Facebook page, or the city's YouTube page. And so first I'm going to have introductions by the council members, and then we'll have introductions as well with the staff. We'll start with those of us that are in the building and then go to those that are joining us virtually. So I'm going to ask the city clerk if she would begin for us with introductions.
Stephanie Kelly, City Clerk.
Renee Johnson, District 4.
Victoria Watlington, District 3.
Julie Eiselt, Mayor Pro Tem and serving at large.
I'm Vi Lyles, and I serve as mayor.
Marcus Jones, City Manager.
Malcolm Graham, District 2.
Greg Phipps, at large.
Tarek Bakari, District 6.
Good evening, Matt Newton, District 5.
Ed Driggs, District 7.
Larkin Eggleston, District 1.
Dimple Ajmera, at large.
Braxton Winston, at large.
Okay, has everyone been introduced? I would also like to note that we are following the mask mandate that we have in Mecklenburg County and in an enclosed building. So unless eating or drinking, we will be masked. All right, we begin our meeting with an invocation or an expression of faith or inspiration, followed by our Pledge of Allegiance. The invocation tonight is from Council Member Newton. So, Mr. Newton, and then we'll follow with standing and reciting the Pledge of Allegiance to our flag.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Let us bow our heads and pray silently together, each of us according to our individual beliefs. Let us offer thanks for our daily bread and blessings for one another. Let us seek to be a source of hope for those in need and guide us in truth, fairness, goodwill, friendship, and concern for others. Let us, this council, give gratitude for our opportunity to serve our great city and give us the strength to make the right decisions. Let the feelings of love, kindness, and a well-directed yet gentle spirit always be reflected in all that we do. In this we pray. Amen.
All right. If we would now stand for the Pledge of Allegiance to our flag. All right. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, everyone. The first item on our agenda is that we ask the staff and the council members to have any questions that they've seen after reading the agenda. And I believe that I see Ms. Harris coming in, and we have at our places the information that was requested today. I believe that we will now go through this and ask if there are any additional questions as we move forward. Ms. Harris?
Yes, good evening. Thank you, Mayor and Council. And Mr. Winston, I think you're the main one that I had the written questions and response for this evening. One was on a business item, so you'll have more chance to discuss that one as well when that one comes up for vote. But specific to your questions on the uniform, was that answer satisfactory? The reason it looked like it was, okay, good, thank you. And then also for the CATS inventory. Okay, good. Thank you, Mr. Winston. Anyone else have any questions before we get started?
Any other questions on the consent agenda items or any item? Is there anyone that would like to have a separate vote on a consent item? Is there anyone that would like a separate vote on the consent item? All right, hearing none of that. So may I have a motion for the adoption of consent items 24 through 47?
So
So
moved.
moved.
And I have a second.
Second.
Thank you. All right, we will begin our roll call vote. Ms. Ajmira,
Yes.
Mr. Phipps,
Yes.
Mr. Winston,
Yes.
Mr. Bakari,
Yes.
Mr. Driggs,
Yes.
Mr. Eggleston. Your volume, are you muted?
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Graham? Yes. Ms. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Newton?
Yes.
Ms. Watlington?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem?
Yes.
All right. So that
Dr.
means,
Mark, on one-
I'm sorry. Did someone wish to speak?
Yes,
Mr.
ma'am, it's
Eggleston.
Mark, and I just you didn't mention ones for comment, didn't need a separate vote, just wanted to,
If there was a comment, excuse me, you're right. Did you have a comment that you'd like to make, Mr. Eggleston?
yes, ma'am, I just wanted to draw folks' attention, sometimes with consent agenda, things fly under the radar, and I think several people have already flagged this in the media, but want to make sure that people see that we are moving forward on number 35 with a new light rail station in South End where one is much needed. So I think that's a big win, and just wanted to make sure that that didn't fly under the radar tonight.
Thank you very much, and I apologize for not asking if there was a need for a comment on any item. So are there any other items for comment? Okay, hearing none, we will now go to the action review portion of our agenda. And my understanding is that the city manager has got 2 reports, and there is a brief closed session that we will have because it is a repeat of something that we've done already, and it's just the city attorney giving us a final decision on that. So I will now turn it over to the city manager for the agenda overview and presentations.
So thank you, Mayor and members of council. Tonight we have 2 presentations that really work together. One, as you may recall, when Sean Heath was reporting on the ARPA funds, he indicated that there is a 2025 housing and homeless strategy that's been in the works since earlier this year. So we'll get an update on that progress there. And also, it's that time of year where Pam comes in and talks about the Housing Trust Fund and some recommendations that we have. I think what you'll see tonight is a mixture of some of the NOAA product as well as some of the traditional product. So, Mayor, if there aren't any questions, I can introduce item number 3 on the action briefing.
All right.
Okay. Well, okay, with that said, so Mayor and Council, as I mentioned earlier, as a part of our discussion around some of the ARPA funds, there was a conversation about the Charlotte-Mecklenburg 2025 Housing and Homeless Strategy, which was launched in April. You may have heard that there was a presentation in front of the County Board of Commissioners last week. This is the same presentation. This initiative is co-chaired by 2 extraordinary local leaders, as the Mayor mentioned earlier, Gene Woods from Atrium Health, as well as Kathy Passant from Bank of America. And we also have Michael Smith from Charlotte Center Partners here tonight. As Gene will elaborate on, the goal of this effort is to launch a 5-year strategic plan to help Charlotte-Mecklenburg become a national leader in addressing homelessness. And tonight's just really a progress report. We've had a number of working teams. I've been involved. The county manager, Dina DiOrio, has been involved. And from our team, we've had both Sean Heath and Pam Weidman. The strategic plan, I believe, will be released in late October. And with that said, Mayor and Council, I'd like to turn this over to Gene.
All right,
Great.
Mr. Wood.
Thank you. Thank you. Greetings, Mayor Lyles and members of City Council. And let me just say thank you for having us here tonight. And Marcus, to you and your team, you've been fantastic and has really leaned in to help support the multiple committees and work streams. So we're happy to present a progress report on what we've been up to date. And also, Councilman Graham, you serve on one of our work groups, so really appreciate your active interest as well.
I guess I'd start off by saying I'm really honored to co-chair the development of the 2025 Charlotte-Mecklenburg Housing and Homelessness Strategy with Kathy Besant from Bank of America, who unfortunately couldn't be here tonight, but has been a very, very engaged co-chair. And this evening, we want to discuss what we believe the comprehensive effort to address housing instability and homelessness in our community that involves private, public, and not-for-profit sectors. And the reason I guess I personally agreed to co-chair the initiative, notwithstanding everything going on and battling the pandemic, is because it's one of the things that really has connected us to our purpose. Some of us have family or friend members that have experienced homelessness, and this is an opportunity, I think, that we have collectively to deal with the devastating impacts. Now, in Atrium, we begin every meeting with what we call a Connect to Purpose story. And we've adopted that also in our strategy meetings for this as well. And I thought I'd start off by sharing one of those Connect to Purpose stories that occurred at one of our roving COVID testing sites last year. And during one particular shift, there was an elderly African-American gentleman who arrived, and we quickly learned that the real reason he was there was not just for a COVID test, but to see if we could help him with his current housing situation because he was homeless and he didn't know where to go. And so he shared that he'd been living with his sons in their subsidized housing, but was not allowed to stay there any longer because his name wasn't on the lease. And because he was afraid that his sons would lose their housing if he stayed with them, he began temporarily living in vacant homes or near areas of new construction. So our Atrium Health teammates did what they do best. They got in action within minutes. We gave this gentleman food to address his hunger, a toothbrush, cleaning supplies. And one of our social workers also connected him with a local hotel and arranged transportation while he awaited his COVID tests. And then one of our nurse practitioners even happened to have clothes from her husband that were in her trunk, originally on their way to Goodwill. And so we were able to provide him with a fresh change of clothes to take with them to the hotel. And if I step back, I can't imagine personally the conversation that this man had with his sons. As a father myself, I can't imagine having that conversation with my sons to leave a home for the streets. And so we're here to help solve for countless of scenarios such as this one in our community that are occurring every single day. So if you go to the next slide, please. Slide after that. Thank you. So as Charlotte continues to grow and strive to be a national model, I think we all agree that we have to be very intentional about that growth and not have it be a tale of two cities. And we know that you have no chance of economic mobility if you don't first have a home. And what has really resonated and galvanized an incredible dedicated group of businesses, not-for-profits, and public sector leaders and community servants is this vision that we can, if we come together in the right way, create a community right here where homelessness is rare, where homelessness is brief, and where homelessness is non-reoccurring. And that's really the vision we have for this initiative. To do so, we know requires a comprehensive plan. But even more than that, I think it requires a community that bands together, perhaps like we've never had before. Some might call it band together in a way that is radically collaborating in new ways. And that's why I'm really, really passionate and excited about the engagement that we're having with a wide group of stakeholders, including those who have lived experience that are helping us shape the plan that we're going to be sharing here tonight. In fact, there's 100 community-based groups, private sector companies, and educational institutions, and many others that have rolled up their sleeves to join us for this project. And if I could just name a few who are helping us develop this plan, we have Charlotte Rescue Mission, Charlotte Works, Charlotte Mecklenburg Schools, Child Care Resources, Inc., Commonwealth Charlotte, Communities in School, Community Care Bridge, Council for Children's Rights, Covenant Presbyterian Church, Crescent Communities, Crisis Assistance Ministry, to name just a few. So Kathy and I and the entire work group are so grateful to have such a widespread interest and dedicated involvement in establishing and developing this comprehensive plan that, as Marcus said, will be finalized in the end of October. If you go to the next slide, please. Now, many of you know that Charlotte-Mecklenburg has over time made investments in prevention, emergency shelter, permanent housing, though we know that much more investment is certainly going to be required. Because unfortunately, this very evening in Charlotte-Mecklenburg, there'll be over 3,000 individuals, fathers, mothers, brothers, and sisters, who are falling on really hard times and are experiencing literal homelessness, whether in sheltered or unsheltered locations. And that's just the floor. There are thousands others who are on the precipice, as we know, are paying week to week to stay in hotels or doubling up with their families or friends. So if our community really is to be a national model and avoid the fate of other metro areas struggling to address this very issue, then it's going to be important to approach this differently, to chart a new course. And also, we spend a lot of the time learning from best national practice, and we have to do this in a way that, again, we probably have never done before. So in a nutshell, that is the reason that we are here tonight. So I'm going to pass the virtual mic over to Michael Smith, who's going to touch upon the 2025 Charlotte-Mecklenburg Housing and Homelessness Strategy and how it's different than perhaps all the other strategies that we have seen in Charlotte around this issue before. So, Michael?
Thank you, Gene. Thanks for your leadership. Mayor and Council, so great to be with you. Thank you for the leadership that you always provide around these issues of housing affordability. And I'm pleased that we're sharing really a great approach that is incredibly unique in so many efforts. Special thanks to McKinsey & Company for the great consultative support they've provided on this journey. But as we look at how this is different, this 2025 Mecklenburg Housing and Homelessness Strategy really marks a first time in our community's history that the public and private sector have come together to address the full housing continuum, from homelessness to affordable housing, really to the upstream to the struggling households that have not lost a home but are at risk of. The strategy will comprehensively address the systems and structures that cause and perpetuate housing instability and homelessness. The effort is grounded in equity, transparency, and inclusivity, which you heard from Gene, ensuring that the broadest possible representation of all aspects in this work. One of our guiding principles from the beginning has been keeping front and center the people who are impacted and integrating their voice of lived experience into every aspect of what we're considering. We firmly believe that creating a community where everyone can thrive is a critical component of this work and will benefit all the residents of Charlotte-Mecklenburg. This really is a unique approach. We hope that this approach and all the voices that have been involved are going to allow us to come up with things that are comprehensive and so thoughtful. I'm now glad to turn it over to our friend Pam Weidman, who serves on the technical committee for this work, to share more of the specifics and where we are today and what's next. Pam?
Good evening, Mayor, City Council, and Manager Jones. Thank you, Michael, and Gene, for that. As your housing director and as a member of the technical committee, I'm pleased to share this update with you on behalf of the other members of the technical committee, as well as the 9 work streams. If you'll go to the next slide for me, please, Wendy. The 9 work streams, which you'll see depicted on the slide, as well as my colleague, Sean Heath, Manager Jones, and other city staff who've contributed to this work. The structure of this effort, the 9 work streams, was designed based on community interviews, surveys, and focus groups that identified emerging themes and priorities to address what success would look like. The 9 work streams, has been previously mentioned, has been working since May to identify and prioritize draft recommendations that are informed by research and best practices. 4 of the work streams are devoted to the 4 main impact areas of the strategic plan, which are prevention, temporary housing, long-term affordable housing, and cross-sector supports. The other 5 work streams are focused on the foundational work, which will be required to enable the what work streams impact, which are policy, funding, data, and analytics, communication, and ongoing strategy support. If you go to the next slide for me, please. Since the launch of the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Housing and Homeless Strategy in April, over 250 individuals and 115 organizations have signed on to participate in the planning development work. We recognize that before putting any plans into action, that it was imperative to listen to any and all ideas from across our community. We've sought to engage a broad spectrum of stakeholders as possible through a variety of methods, and we aren't done yet. If you'll go to the next slide for me, please. This slide reflects the major themes that have emerged across the work, the what and the how work streams, and summarizes the primary objectives to the work streams that the work streams are seeking to achieve with their recommendations. While recommendations are still under development, we want to share with you each of these themes. The first theme is equity, with a focus on solutions that rectify or address historical and existing inequities. The second theme is access and inventory of housing and other resources to address the full continuum of need. The third work stream is around improving system navigation and reducing silos. And finally, the fourth work stream is about systems change and sustainability. If you go to the next slide for me, please. This slide is just to illustrate other examples of the draft initiatives from all of the 9 work streams. You can see here that 4 what work streams are in blue, and then the 5 how work streams are in teal at the bottom of your screen. The work stream initiatives include improving the front door of assistance in our community by strengthening the intake and triage system. They also include maximizing the use of publicly owned land for affordable housing and eliminating barriers to accessing child care subsidies. The how work stream initiatives include reducing barriers to housing for justice-involved adults, developing a standardized intake and data collection process from across the different systems to reduce the number of times a person has to tell his or her story and to coordinate resources for them. Again, it's really important to note that this is just a sample of the work that has been going on. If you'll go to the next slide for me, please. The work streams, in terms of next steps, will continue refining all of the draft recommendations and connecting with the community over the coming months. There's work toward an October publication of a strategic plan, which will include a prioritized set of opportunities to pursue over the next 5 years, strategic objectives and metrics to define success, and initial recommendations regarding the implementation structure, communications plan, and funding needed to achieve these goals will be outlined in the plan. We will be back to you, hopefully in October, to share this plan with you. This concludes the formal presentation, and I'll turn back to Jean and Michael to answer any questions that you all might have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pam, Michael, and Jean. So we've got some questions, or does anyone want to be recognized for questions? Mr. Graham, followed by Mr. Bakari.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And it's more of a comment and then 2 questions towards the end. Just want to thank Mr. Woods and Kathy and Michael Smith, Marcus, Pam, who's been working with us on this effort. I am a member of the Center City Partners Board of Directors and have the opportunity to work on the task force with Jean and the team. And I just want to thank them for the months of hard work that we put into this. This started really last year, Michael, as you know, in terms of just trying to how do we connect the dots and really begin to address the issues as a community, the private sector, the public sector, as well as nonprofits and the organizations in the community. And so I am very, very pleased that we're at this point that we are getting ready to dot I's and cross T's as relates to producing a final report for public consideration as well as the consideration of the Charlotte City Council. It should be noted that I did have the opportunity also last week to hear the presentation that was given also to the Mecklenburg Board of County Commission. So my comments tonight is reflective of what I heard then in terms of some of the questions back and forth from the commissioners to Mr. Woods and Ms. Basant, as well as Mr. Woods, our meeting last week when we talked specifically about how do we implement the plan once it's done. And so my questions and comments are around those two items. One in particular is, once the plan is done, how do we bring it to life? Who is going to be responsible for doing the work, making sure that what we have is not just words on paper, but they're action items that can be actionable, and that we as a community can hold ourselves accountable for. And so the conversation we had last week was creating a new nonprofit to do some of this work. I'm not sure that's the way to go right now. I'm open and willing to be convinced that it is, based on the research that the team has done. But, you know, the county government does a great job. It is our lead agency for homelessness in this community. They house all the supportive services necessary to be effective and efficient right away. And they have the capacity with a homeless COSAR, if we can use that word, someone trying to lead this effort to hit the ground running versus creating a new entity to do the work. I think we waste time by doing that, where we can really focus on the work. And so it's not really a question. It's just, Mr. Woods and Michael, something for you to kind of think about as we begin to finalize the report. Is the community is going to want to know that we have the capacity to deliver on the promise, right? And who's going to lead the charge to making sure that we deliver on the promise, and that there's some accountabilities that we're doing just that. And so hopefully there's going to be more conversation, Mr. Woods, in terms of what does that look like and how do we kind of make that happen, right? The last item, and again, based on my interaction as chairman of the Great Neighborhoods Committee, I have the opportunity to talk to people at the federal level, some of our peer cities across the country, and it goes without saying that Charlotte has a reputation of being one of the leaders in the affordable housing space in the country. And based on my, again, hearing the conversations, hearing some of the questions that was asked and answered last week, I hope that we can be narrowly focused on dealing with the issue of homelessness, and not try to be too broad-based where we're trying to deal with homelessness and affordable housing, right? I think if we do that, we really lose our focus. I think our focus should be providing the resources necessary to tackle the homeless problem specifically. That is from, you know, homelessness to maybe SRO housing, anything under 30% of AMI and below. I think it's right within our sweet spot, and anything above that, I think it takes away. I don't think we should do it. I'm going to be quite honest with you. I think we ought to be narrowly tailored, narrowly focused, focusing on that population, because again, the city of Charlotte does such a great job in the affordable housing space to give up some of that work, right, for the lack of a better way of saying it, or to foster some of that work out to another third-party organization if that is to occur. I don't think it would be in the best interest of the city, nor do I think it would be in the best interest of the efforts that we're making for affordable housing long-term. So those are just two comments, Mr. Woods, in terms of the new nonprofit that we talked about last week, as well as making sure that as we begin to finalize the report, that we really begin to focus narrowly on addressing the homeless problem versus being too broad and trying to accomplish everything. I clearly understand that this continuum of care from homelessness all the way to 80% of AMI, but I think what's really impacting the citizens of Charlotte and the community right now is those who are struggling to keep a roof under their heads, struggling to find housing at that 30% of AMI and below. And if we can focus like a laser on that population through this report, have some accountabilities, I think we'll be moving in the right direction. Thank you, Madam Mayor. Mr. Woods, thank you very much for the work that you're doing. And if you can just kind of comment on those two items, I would really appreciate it. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Appreciate the very insightful comments. Two things. One is on the latter point, I do think that there's so many different root causes to homelessness. But to your point, if we try to address some education, the mobility, and everything, I don't think we accomplish what we really want around the set of homelessness. So I think the committee is refining that specific task and what success looks like around the idea of homelessness, so that we're not trying to solve everything, all the social determinants of health and homelessness at one time. So I think those are good comments, and we'll continue to have that conversation about what the success specifically look like around that. On the structure, I'm typically a very big form follows function type leader. So I think once we get the report finalized, I think the question is the one that you asked: what structures, what vehicles are going to be most effective in terms of carrying out the strategic plan? The plan will be 10% of it. The 90% of it is going to be execution. So I think once we get the plan, then I think, to your point, we can have that dialogue. What is the best way to really make sure that we deliver on this promise? And so look forward to those conversations ahead.
Thank you.
Mr. Bakari, sorry, I had the mic off.
Thank you very much. First of all, again, much gratitude to everyone working on this. Particularly want to also recognize Kathy Besant, who, as you said, has worked long and hard on this with you, not here with us tonight, and congratulate her on her new strategy role, which is very exciting, and she has been quite a force of positive impact on Charlotte. So I really liked a lot of the things I heard, particularly an emphasis on data and how you guys were going to use that as a really overriding, map quest, so to speak, of where you're going. I think not just emphasizing that, but also outlining what success looks like in relation to that data and those metrics. That level sets us all. Too often around here, and I know with the horse and brain power of this committee and everyone you have there, that this is intuitive to you guys, but a lot of times we don't set out the metrics of success on our fronts, and they're crafted as we go along. I think being upfront and proactive and transparent on that when the plan is rolled out, while it makes it exponentially harder, it's going to make it so much more credible, because we're all going to know what we're aiming at from that perspective. So I love that. I also love the wording of system-wide approach. I think that's really critical, that the end-to-end capability, where once someone is into the system, like we said, there's multiple different paths and routes, from mental health help to upward mobility training needs, to, the list goes on and on. So making sure that we have the systemic approach that understands where there are gaps, and that ultimately becomes a part of the plan, so that before we bring someone to an end state, they don't fall off a proverbial cliff because there's no other program to pick it up. I think that's going to be critical there, and I like that you've called that out. I think the only thing I didn't see in there, and again, I'm just speaking from a macro strategy perspective of this being the guiding force for the work you guys have underway, would be when you think of a system-wide approach, one thought has to center around the givers. And I believe there's a huge piece that, I'll say it as elegantly as possible, the responsibility of the giver. We can create all of the perfect system-wide programs that bring someone from walking in a door all the way through to self-sustainability or to mental health help or all these other items. But if we don't find a way to stop repeating the mistakes of the past and have preventive factors that get people into that system, I think we will really struggle with meeting those measurable outcomes that we're talking about. And I want to emphasize that maybe you all are thinking about that and it's not stated in there. I guess that's maybe the form of my question, Michael and Jean. Is that something you're also contemplating? Because we can build the greatest system in the world. It has every scenario for every option that comes in. But if we still have, forces that are pushing folks away from entering those systems and getting the help they need, it may just end up being repeating some of the mistakes of the past. I'll leave it with that kind of question for how you guys are thinking about that. And thank you.
And Michael, I'll have you answer it as well. I mean, I think, first of all, thank you for the suggestion and the idea. We are having the conversation along those lines, and we're still very much in the design phase. So we appreciate all input like that, not just from tonight, but going forward. I do think that at the last meeting, we heard from someone who has lived experience. And one of the things they said that when they were homeless, in their square blocks, if you will. I don't know. He said there was like 20 different not-for-profits, and it was hard for him to figure out how to even navigate those. So I think part of it is also, if I'm understanding the question, part of it is also the responsibility to make sense and make it easy to access some of these resources that already exist. Because it's quite complicated, and it's triple complicated if you're homeless and don't know where to go with this. So part of what we're thinking about that is first making the system much easier when you have these multitude of systemic issues, and we'll give some more thought to that because you're raising some additional very good points. And Michael, I don't know if there's anything else you would want to add.
Thank you, Gene, and thank you, Councilman. I love the data approach to this, and you'll see in the recommendations that there are some great dashboard type elements that will tie back to the original mission of this being rare, non-recurring, and brief. And we think bringing everything back to that will be powerful. And I believe the point that one of the major points you're making is that we have to look at prevention, and we have to look upstream, and we have to think about things like outreach counselors, which we have seen highly effective in our urban core at helping people that are struggling with whatever is putting them in this position, connecting them to the services that they need. And that will definitely be part of the recommendations.
And just one point of clarification, I agree with all of that. I think just said a little more bluntly, what I mean is when folks are homeless and are looking for assistance, we keep hearing reports again and again. We remember a 2018 article where the nonprofit leaders of the community came together and penned an op-ed. Again, it's about when they're on the streets and they're getting some levels of resources that they can keep afloat there. It keeps many good folks out of the systems that are designed to help them. So it goes back to, from aggressive panhandling to everyone who's just given a couple bucks down the street, when in reality, that person maybe needs to be at a roof above or one of the other places. Again, it's a complicated topic, but I don't think it's one we can ignore as a huge factor for ensuring that the people get into the system we've spent all this money on that's designed to try to find an outcome for them of success.
Thank you.
Agreed.
Mayor Pro Tem. Mr. Winston? Is Mr. Winston?
Yeah, I'm here.
You good? Okay.
Can we go to slide 3, please?
Which slide?
It's up. She got it. Slide 3. So thank you. I do think the way this work is broken out and the data that is presented is excellent. I think the work is fantastic. However, the goal feels a bit unambitious. Homelessness in this nation, in this state, in this city is a result of a series of policy decisions. I would ask, it seems like this goal of becoming a national leader in how we deal with homelessness does a better job of centering us the policymakers, us the corporations, us the folks that are around the table doing the work, and it doesn't necessarily center the condition of our homeless neighbors. I would ask, why is the goal not more ambitious? Why is the goal not to eliminate homelessness here in Charlotte and Mecklenburg County? And I leave that to Ms. Weidman, Senator, Councilman Graham, Mr. Smith, or Mr. Woods, whoever wants to take that, whoever's been around the table doing that work. It seems like that would be the type of goal that we would set for our neighbors. I wonder why that didn't occur.
All right, does Mr. Woods or Mrs. Smith, do you want to respond to the goal being to end homelessness in our county?
Gene, you want to ham and egg this one? Because we talked about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think this was ultimately, we want to end homelessness. I think that's the goal. Obviously, that's the big audacious focus that we have. I think the committee sort of said, so let's break it down so that it's measurable, and that's when we came rare, brief, and non-reoccurring. And so that was more a nod towards making sure that we are keeping ourselves accountable towards it. And we know that I mentioned tonight there's 3,000 people that are going to be homeless, but we also know there's 23,000 people that might be evicted down the road. And I think that may be part of the challenge that we also have to wrap our arms around. I think you said it right. There's a policy and ultimately a funding that we'll have to attach to that. And so you'll see when we come back in October that we will sort of define those scenarios going forward. But I think ultimately that's the goal, and how we defined it as a committee was trying to be as precise as we could.
So I'm sorry. What I'm hearing is that we believe that the goal is to eliminate homelessness, but we haven't stated that. But we have decided to create a goal that we think is measurable. But why wouldn't elimination of homelessness be a measurable goal?
It could be a matter of words. We said current and preventing future homelessness. So that was the way that articulated. We certainly can be more precise, but that's really, Bryson, it was an attempt to get at that. So addressing current and preventing future homelessness, the different way of saying that. But I think your point is well taken.
We were also trying to learn from our last effort around chronic homelessness was called Housing First. And we were able to find permanent supportive housing for over 1,000 of our fellow citizens, and what we found is there was not enough focus upstream, and the pipeline of people falling into homelessness, we were not keeping up. And that effort was about ending chronic homelessness within 24 months. Then we added a year to it, and we ended up adopting best practices from it, and we became better at it as a community in addressing homelessness. We kept coming back to, can it be eliminating it, or are we needing to look upstream? And that's why we tied together that rare, brief, and non-recurring with the idea of addressing current and preventing future. But as Gene said, I think it's an excellent point, an excellent challenge.
Thank you. Anybody else who wants to chime in, but I would love if that was the stated goal. I think that would be ambitious and bold, and would obviously put us as a leader if we were able to figure this out. I'm happy to come to the table to figure out, how we can measure that, how we can work towards that, or whatever it needs to be. Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem, followed by Ms. Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Gene, thank you for the presentation. And Michael, you, Gene, and Kathy, I know that group is the right group to really attack this issue and make a difference. So I really appreciate your commitment and your work on this. And my only comment is that I hope that as you talk about stakeholders, that it's super comprehensive, not only where you want to get, but where they've been. And so I think about this past week, the mayor and Councilmember Phipps and I were at the groundbreaking for the new on-ramp center, which is the resource center for the relatives, where youth 16 to 24 can go and get services for homelessness, for trying to find housing, working on their GED, all the things that they need to keep them from becoming homeless adults. And so when I think about them, for instance, it's great that they're building this new center, but presently they can only serve 11% of our at-risk youth in our region. The opportunity, Leading on Opportunity Task Force estimated that there are 45,000 disconnected youth in Charlotte. So just hoping that, and I'm not saying you haven't looked at this, but I just really look at things like that. What are we doing to really help our young people not fall into those patterns and be homeless, and making sure that the organizations that have been doing the work have an opportunity to tell you what resources they don't have, because some of them are doing great work, and so that they can they can do even better work, even though maybe there's new systems that are being created. So that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Trish Hobson from the Relatives is an old friend and is on our working committee, and we're thrilled to have her expertise at the table.
Great. Yeah, she's doing fantastic work. I think we have Ms. Hajmira.
No, Ms. Johnson.
Ms. Johnson is next.
Yes.
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you for the presentation. It's exciting to be addressing homelessness from our perspective. I wanted to follow up on something that Mr. Graham said when he was speaking, and I wanted to correct or get clarification. I thought that you said that Charlotte is recognized as a leader in affordable housing solutions. Mm-hmm. So that's pretty scary on the state of the nation. I mean, we have great goals, but there's a housing crisis for affordable housing in the city. So that's, I just wanted to, I know that this group is simply, or not simply, but focused on homelessness, but affordable housing in our city is still a crisis. So that is part of the challenge, as you all know, that there's a lack of inventory in affordable housing. I would also say some of the challenges, and I hope that there's a focus on the mental health piece and the trauma. As an advocate for head injury and brain injury, there's data that shows 1 in 2 individuals who are homeless have a history of head injury. So I hope that we're really peeling back the layers on the data and on the trauma in order to break those cycles. We also know that criminal records is a huge barrier for housing here in this city. And the eviction. So I would just say, having been working with homeless populations for the past decade, I would just ask that there be focus on trauma and criminal records and the lack of medical care. And I would ask my Republican colleagues to assist in the Medicaid expansion. I think that would really clear up some of the problems with the homeless if people could have access to the appropriate medical treatment. But I'm excited about this focus. I'd also like to know if you all are working with the continuum of care. They have they have great data, so good. So I'm excited to see the presentation. But again, the mental health piece, the Medicaid transformation, and the criminal records is going to be a huge consideration. Thank you.
Yeah, we would agree that I think every single meeting we've had a conversation around mental health. It's come through. So there's a lot of conversation around that as well as part of this work. So thank you for those suggestions.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Ms. Hajmira, followed by Mr. Phipps.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Great to see you, Jean. And thank you for the presentation. And Michael, thank you for your contribution as well. A couple of my questions have already been addressed around the execution and really having concrete steps, next steps, so that it leads to an action and it's not just a plan. Mm-hmm. Also, Michael touched on the Housing First program, so I have a follow-up question to that. I know that this will come in front of us in October sometime, but I would be interested in seeing what are the recommendations when it comes to Housing First program in terms of expansion, in terms of expanding that program. Michael, do you want to comment on that, or do you want us to just wait till the report comes out?
Housing First is a national best practice and will continue to be something that we implement and look to expand on through the recommendations of this plan. There's nothing like a home to solve homelessness. not to oversimplify, but that's the basis, is rapid rehousing with supportive services. It will be a part of it.
Absolutely. And, we have seen it work really well in other cities across the nation. It's a national model, like you mentioned, and it really gives dignity to residents who are experiencing homelessness, because you can't really access mental health treatment and so on, and without the housing. I think housing goes first. So it's great to hear that it's continuing to be part of the discussion. I'm also interested in hearing if there has been any discussion with County Commissioner, and have they been given presentation?
Yeah, actually, the county commissioners, we've got Dina, who's also actively involved, and we provided a presentation to them. I think it was last week. So they've heard a similar version and are also actively involved in the work group. So when we talk about this is going to require everybody's collaboration, that includes city, county, businesses, and so forth. So.
What kind of feedback have you all received from the county?
Michael, you want to take that?
Sure. We had a great discussion with them and lots of issues that we'll be returning to. Conversations about, how do we bring this to implementation? What involvement will the city, the county, and CMS have? They recommended that we do have a conversation with CMS, and we are, because there are lots of homeless children that are in our school system. And if we're going to have a comprehensive plan, it needs to think about, everyone that is affected by housing insecurity and homelessness. What else, Maura?
What we are asking them, it's nothing. We're just bringing it up.
Yeah. There was an ask of, is there a current ask of the county commission at this point? There's not. This is an update. We're thrilled to have the leadership of Councilman Graham and of Marcus and many members of staff, and as we are with Chairman Dunlap and Dina and Stacy and many members of the county staff as well. Again, just trying to get everybody around the table as we advance this and try to come up with something that is this comprehensive.
I appreciate you sharing the feedback from the county. But I'm looking forward to reviewing the report, and I might have follow-up questions afterwards. So I'll save those for you next time. Well, thank you so much.
Mr. Phipps. Thank you, Ms. Ajmira. Mr. Phipps.
Thank you, Mayor. It's not my intention to date myself, but I was here on the council back in 2005 in a similar meeting as this, when the late Chris Wolf outlined a 10-year plan to end homelessness in Charlotte-Mecklenburg. I know since that time, since we're back here, we're still here with trying to battle this problem, but I know since that time we've had other iterations of homelessness plans, and I would be interested in knowing what makes this particular plan different from the ones that we have undertaken in the past. Now I know that the timeline is probably dated, but I don't need an answer or an explanation right now. But I would like to connect at some point with either Mr. Smith or Mr. Woods or Mr. Passant, just to get an idea of what makes this plan a better plan, or I would hope that we would have built on all of the previous plans, but just what makes this plan more hopeful than our efforts in the past that have failed to materialize. So I would be interested in knowing something about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Phipps. So if from the comments around the dais today and to your questions and the answers, we can certainly see how complex this issue is. A number of us have worked on this for many, many years with some of the goals that you've outlined today. For me, the most important thing that I think happens is that we do take a fresh look at everything every time that we have the ability to bring in what's better, what might be different, and what will be done. 15 years ago, Seattle was known as the #1 place in dealing with homelessness and housing. And today, it is not that. So you have to come back and rethink, redo, and look at what the new challenges are. And there are a lot of challenges. I understand that. Those challenges of, the continuum of the care is from the federal government. The county is responsible for homelessness and services for homelessness. The city's trying to make sure that people that work in our city can live in our city. So when you look at from, I think the number was 81,000 people pay more than 30% of their income for housing. And when you add transportation, it's over 40% of their income. And we've got 3,000 people in homelessness situation. Imagine what you're trying to solve. So I want to say that I think every council member around this table applauds you and is grateful that you're taking a new look to deal with those 81,000 who need a place. We need to keep them in their houses to the 3,000 that need a place to live. So thank you so very much. We look forward to the October report. And with that, hearing that, we will go to our next topic and say thank you. Go and have a great rest of your evening.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. The next item on the manager's agenda, Mr. Jones.
So thank you, Mayor and members of council. We'll have Pam Whiteman come in and give you an update on the Housing Trust Fund recommendations. And if we go back a little bit in time, I think, Pam, it would have been, I guess, the beginning with the combination with the city and the private sector to get our HTF allocation up from 15 million to 50. And now you're starting to see some of the fruits of that collaboration. And so, Pam, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Manager Jones. Again, Mayor and Council, thank you for allowing me to present to you tonight. Wendy, if you'll go ahead and go to the next slide. I know you all are very familiar with this, so I'll get through this as quickly as I can. But I want to level set with you. And Madam Mayor, I think you asked this the last time we were here in March or April, and so we sent something out, but I want to just level set by stating with that, Mr. Jones, you alluded to $100 million in housing bonds since the 2018 referendum. The City Council, and you guys should applaud yourself for this, you've awarded $67 million of that $100 million since we started this in 2018. This includes the $3 million that is set aside for Brookhill, and so I'll talk about that a little bit later. But you have a total of 33 developments underway. And allow me to break that down for you just a little more. That is a total of 3,958 units. 2,150 of those units are either complete or they're under construction, with the remaining 1,808 in the closing process. And so of all of those units, I would just remind you that because of your Housing Trust Fund guidelines, at least 20% of all of those developments must include housing units for households that are earning 30% and below. So I thought that's very important to raise as it relates to the discussion that we just had. So if you'll just go to the next slide for me, our briefing objectives are pretty much the same as they always are. What I would point out on this slide is that your Housing Trust Fund is still gap financing. It often includes an application to the state for either a 9% or 4% low-income housing tax credit. It doesn't have to. Tonight, we're only talking about those 4% tax credits because you all have already approved the cycle for the 9%, which is once per year, and some NOAAs. And also, spoiler alert, you have some home ownership in here as well. I talked about at least 20% of the units must be targeted to households earning 30% and below the area median income, and there's always a long-term deed restriction. Our goal is not just to create these units, but to preserve them over the long term. So if you'll go to the next slide for me, please, Wendy. This is just a reminder, since 2002, you all have allocated $210 million. Most notably, since 2018, you upped your $15 million to $50 every other bond cycle. Next slide, please, Wendy.
Pam?
Yes, sir.
I know you're on a roll, but if you go back one, and I'm just echoing what you said earlier, you know, those last two bond cycles are almost worth all of the previous bond cycles combined. And so we're really starting to see what can occur when we have the capacity.
Correct. Thank you, sir. If you go to the next slide for me, please, Wendy. Just as a reminder, you started, we had a little bit of carryover from the 2018 when we started this in January. So we started with a 51 million there. You all have approved 12 million and 4% development. You've approved 3.1 million in non-LIHTC developments, and you approved 2.4 for 9% in April. Since that time, NOAAs are, you'll recall, they can be presented to us on a rolling or flexible, because we want to capture those before they're bought up by an out-of-town investor or otherwise. So you've awarded $1 billion, most recently to the Pines on Wendover. So we are beginning the discussion tonight with $32.7 million. If you go to the next slide for me, please. Always, as the mayor just said, we always like to take a fresh look. You all will recall in 2020, as a result of the mayor's housing task force, we did a couple of things. The task force recommended that we continue down our path of new construction, that we continue including supportive services, and we continue preserving, supporting NOAAs. But what was really new out of that was setting aside a portion of your trust fund dollars for home ownership. This is our second time doing that. We continue to learn. The first time we had a lot of questions, but we didn't get any takers. You all asked us to go back, talk with the development community, the for sale development community, to see what we needed to do, what we needed to change to get some takers. And so we did that. If you go to the next slide for me, please. We share this with our development community. We bring, as normal practice, we bring the development community together. We release an RFP. We did that on July 9th. Developers had until August 9th to submit their proposals. Other details that I won't bore you with, but tonight we're here, September 13th. We want to brief you, and then we'll come back on the 27th and we'll ask for your approval of these. So we're not asking you to make any decisions tonight. We're just simply briefing you as we said we would in every round. If you go to the next slide for me, please. In terms of community participation, this is a pretty standard slide. We do require community meetings. Some of those meetings are still in process, but they all will have occurred before we ask you to approve these on the 27th. If you'll go to the next slide for me, please. Again, this is just another depiction of the process. And what's most important here is that we're here tonight on the 13th briefing you. Our partners at LISC, they will also brief their investment advisory committee pretty shortly as well, so that we can all be in sync for their vote and for your vote on the 27th. If you'll go to the next slide for me, please. Again, this is another depiction of the process. LISC, they have their investment advisory approval. Applications are submitted to the finance agency. They'll get approved. Both the city and LISC will work on closing the loan so we can get these projects underway and under construction, and then they'll be constructed, and we'll monitor through that process. If you'll go to the next slide for me, please, Wendy. These are our policies and our evaluation criteria. Again, you all can probably recite this to me, so I won't recite it to you. I've talked about the community engagement. That's really, really important. If you go to the next slide for me, please. We always like to learn, not just from our housing, but from both our sustainability efforts. And so you can see that there's some sustainability and green building energy efficiency requirements, not that only you all have, or we have as the City of Charlotte, but the North Carolina Housing Finance Agency has. And Mr. Bakari, you always keep me honest, and I appreciate that. Workforce development, we don't forget about that. We don't want to just get people in housing. We don't want to just help them obtain it, but we want to help them thrive once they get in there through increasing their workforce opportunity. And so we recognize that as well. If you'll go to the next slide for me, please. We talked about our locational guidelines. What I will say is I won't go through these, but what I will point out to you tonight is that you're going to see two naturally occurring, and you're going to see some senior developments, which according to our guidelines, those are exempt from your locational guidelines and all that scoring. And of course, the affordable home ownership is as well. If you go to the next slide for me, please. This is our review team. It's a collective review team between list staff and city staff, and I would be remiss if I did not thank the housing staff and all the other staff, not just housing staff, in housing and neighborhoods who make this presentation and this work possible. Go to the next slide for me, please. Our approach remains the same. It's housing and neighborhood services in partnership with LISC. We're looking at data as we make these decisions. And then we have our guiding principles, our Housing Trust Fund, our Charlotte Housing Opportunity Fund. If there's public or privately owned land involved, we try to incorporate low-cost debt. Our partnership with Enlivian, where they've set aside some project-based housing vouchers for us, and then we try to use our state and federal resources again to make this work possible. If you go to the next slide for me. This is the meat of the presentation. You will see in terms of 4% proposals, we have a total of 5. You will see and I'll walk through each of these. What I would point out, if you'll just go ahead and go to the next slide for me, I'll walk through these really briefly. But what you will see is we have 2 NOAAs, we have 2 home ownership, and we have 2 in areas of high opportunity. And I'll walk through those. You can pretty much go. Well, let me stay here for just a second here. You can see our total request here. What I always like to point to is, on average, your city investment per unit is about $26,000 per unit. You can see that LISC is putting in 12 million there. And so for a total of, again, 879 units in this round, should you all approve all of these. If you go to the next slide for me, please. 26% of this is dedicated toward those households earning 30% and below. Again, that relates to the discussion we just had. And let me just go back one. I know a couple times ago we talked about not having those units at the 50%, and so you can see that 12% of the units are for 50% households. If you go to the next slide for me, please. This is Aldersgate. They are doing a combination of a senior and family on some of their land that they have on their campus. Their request is $2.9 million from the Housing Trust Fund and $3 million from the CHOIF, the Housing Opportunity Investment Fund. I won't read this to you. 136 units, a leverage ratio of 1:8, a 30-year affordability period there. If you go to the next slide for me, please. Ballantine Seniors Apartments. I know we've been talking about this for a while. This is in District 7. What I want to point out on this one is the HTF request is for $1 million. In our RFP and through conversations with you all, we talked a lot about if we want to do this in areas of high opportunity, we know that we will need a higher or an increased housing trust fund development. I don't think anybody is against that, but I wanted to just point that out. In exchange, though, I really want to commend the development community. In exchange, the developer on this one particularly, for that, they have agreed to a 4 40-year affordability period rather than a 30-year. We don't want to just get these on the ground, but we want to keep them affordable for as long as we can, particularly in these areas of high opportunity. If you go to the next slide for me, please. The same thing with 8th and Tryon. The request is $3.2 million here. Because it's in an area of high opportunity, the developer has agreed to a 40-year affordability commitment on this one as well. If you go to the next slide for me, please. Galloway Crossing, the request is 2.4. The affordability period is 30 years, 78 units there. It's a senior development as well. If you go to the next slide for me, please. Historic Nathaniel Carr. This is a senior development as well. You can see the HTF request and the CHOIF request, 30-year affordability, senior development, 120 units. If you'll go to the next slide for me, please. This is the first of 2 NOAAs. This is Maple Way Apartments. It's in District 1. It's consistent with our housing plan in terms of preserving units. You can see a before and an after picture. And what's really exciting about this NOAA is not only are we keeping people in place, so this is one of your truest forms of anti-displacement. So this is anti-displacement work that you're already doing in advance of the Nest Commission. I know you guys are going to talk about that later tonight, but this is an example of anti-displacement. What's also exciting about this is that the developer here will partner with Atrium to provide a full-time on-site community health worker who will facilitate referrals and activities, on-site programming in the areas of health and wellness, financial literacy, and workforce development and education. And they're able to do this because they're a foundation and they have lots of partners to do this work. So really exciting. If you'll go to the next slide for me, the same applies here on this NOAA related to the partnership with Atrium. This is the largest NOAA that you would have done in your history of doing NOAAs, which is a best practice across the country that we just talked about. This is 265 units. The other good thing, exciting thing about Shamrock Gardens is that this property has the most affordable rent of any market rate property in Charlotte today. And so the goal here is to preserve it. What I will also point out here is that this ask is $6 million from the trust fund, it's 6.4 from the CHOIF Foundation, from the CHOIF. One of the reasons that ask is so high is because you have 265 units that you are trying to preserve here. But what I would point out is that your cost per city investment is $22,000. So a leverage ratio of 1 to 3 here. If you'll go to the next slide for me, please. This is home ownership. They are requesting, and this is a newer developer that we're beginning to work with, Urban Trends Real Estate. This is in District 2. They're requesting $320,000. The goal is to create 10 affordable home ownership units here. For households earning between 61 and 80% of the area median income. If you'll go to the next slide for me, please. Druid Hills Legacy Duet Homes. This is Dream Key. They too want to create home ownership. Their request is $704,000. They're going to create 22 units. And the good thing here is that on both this home ownership opportunity and the one I just spoke to you, the homeowners will also be able to qualify for the down payment assistance program that we have. So again, you are really helping people become homeowners in this city. If you go to the next slide for me, please. This is just a map. We always like to show you where these developments, how they shake out on a map. And then if you'll go to the last slide for me, please. I started with saying we were beginning with $32.7 million. If you choose to fund all of these, this will leave you a balance of 9.4 for your January round. And remember, you have the $3 million for Brook Hill still in your bank. And so that concludes my presentation, and I am happy to answer any questions that you all might have.
All right, Mr. Graham, and then followed by Mr. Phipps.
Thank you, Ms. White, for that great presentation. I'm excited that we're getting an early start moving forward with this. I guess my first question is, when do we take the money out of the bank for Brook Hill? And I mean, when?
Well, Mr. Graham, I know you shouldn't answer a question with a question, but I would say that is your decision. So you all, that's a council decision, sir.
Well, I think at some point we need to give the developer, talk with him one last time, see where he's at, and then we need to make a decision on not having the money just being frozen and not utilizing it. So I'll take that conversation offline, talk with the mayor and the manager in reference to how we move forward with that. Secondly, that gives us like $9 plus $12 million, right? And we had a meeting months ago, Mr. Manager, where I kind of challenged you and Ms. Wyman to be more creative and think out of the box, because we were such a forward-thinking city in terms of housing that, other than doing what we've currently been doing, which we're doing extremely well, that we kind of think out of the box and do some other stuff. So I'm patiently waiting to kind of do something different and new. And even at our task force meeting, even Mr. Winston suggested that how can we do something different with the housing trust fund money to be a lot more proactive and progressive, and I'm just kind of dying to see what we can do to do that. Lastly, Councilmember Johnson, I agree with you in your last statement. I cringe too when Charlotte is a national leader, right? Because it demonstrates how deep the problem is nationwide in terms of affordability. And I think sometimes in Charlotte, we're just so hard on ourselves that we can't sit back and celebrate what we do right. It is a problem in Charlotte, that the housing affordability and the number of units that we need, we're going to get there. But as you can see, we're slowly but surely kind of chopping at this big tree, trying to get it down, which is the housing for those who need it. But I think sometimes in Charlotte, we just need to take a step back and celebrate what we're currently doing, because we're doing a lot of things right. Lastly, we talked about the $50 million for the bond. What we didn't say was that the mayor was able to get the private community to match that. So there's yet another $50 million that goes into that bucket for affordability in our community. And so I think we're doing all the right things, notwithstanding the magnitude of the problem, both here in Charlotte and throughout the country. And so, we get calls from all over the country asking what we're doing. We just was interviewed a couple of weeks ago about how fast we were able to get the money from the CARES Act out to the community, out to those who need it. And I think that's something that, notwithstanding the fact that folks need more help, that we were able to move on a dime and be progressive and reactive to what's happening in our community. I think we ought to take a step back and say, okay, we're doing some good things, but your point is, how can we do more, right? I get it, and that's what I'm asking the manager. How can we do even more? Thank you.
All right, Mr. Phipps. I'm sorry, Mr. Jones wanted to reply.
So, great. This, Mr. Graham's appetite is, we can never feed him. What I will say, we appreciate the challenge. One thing that I do want to say that's important is that, unlike in previous cycles, we do have, for the first time, some single-family homes, as well as pushing with the NOAAs. The other thing I would say, just to bring to everybody's attention, while this is awesome, we'll get to January and potentially only have $9 million. And so any concept of whether 50 million is enough, I think this is showing that 50 million may not be enough, especially when you go back to the match that we got from the private sector that isn't available right now. So I think it's a lot of good things that are going on. But I would say that I'm not even sure you could have a summer 4% LIHTC given what we have left today if all of this were approved. Is that right, Ms. Whiteman?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Okay, so just a heads up here. Mr. Phipps?
Yeah, I turn your attention to slide 27. I just want to get Now, this duet homes, is that synonymous with duplexes?
It depends on what street you're living on.
Mr. Phipps, you always keep me on my toes, but the short answer is that is similar to a duplex. The style of the home is similar to a duplex.
Okay. I mean, it's an attractive looking duplex. I mean, it looks, I mean, like a single family residential unit.
Yeah.
But it's two.
That's right. If you wanted to see what an example, and it won't be the exact example, but if you go over to Optimus Park, I believe that David Weekley is building a market rate product that is similar to this, and those are on the ground today, and they're much more expensive than this.
I looked it up one time because there's one that's being built by my house. It's a duet, and it has to do with some type of the ownership and how it's calculated. It's just a little bit different than a duplex. But there is a difference, and I'm not a realtor or a lawyer, so we need to get from Patrick or from our real estate folks the definition of a duet. And I joke about it, but I've seen these all over the city now being called duets, and I used to think it was like, well, you don't want to be a duplex, it's just like, now we have a playbook instead of a plan, so you have a duet instead of a duplex. But I think that there is a difference in the way the ownership is defined.
You're correct, Mayor. It's a smaller version of a townhome community.
Yeah.
If a townhome community is generally about 5 to 10 units in one building, right? All of those are home ownership. This is a smaller building, a duet rather than a duplex, but both are home ownership.
Yeah. Okay.
I have one final question.
More, Mr. Phipps?
We've all heard of the familiar terms market rate housing, affordable housing. But recently, in some of the rezonings that we've been getting, some of the developers have been coming up with some new terms that I'm wondering, are you familiar with? Have you ever heard of attainable housing or approachable housing?
I have heard of attainable housing, Mr. Phipps. I have not heard of approachable housing.
I just want to know what do those means. Are they going to be becoming more familiar in our vernacular when it comes to housing options, or somebody just being reckless with these terms, or what? So I'm just trying to get a feel for, is there a definition associated with these? What's attainable housing mean?
I will find out. I don't want to spout it out, and we will put something in your Q&A with a definition if there is a legitimate definition for those.
For both approachable and attainable.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you very much. Mr. Phipps, anything else? All right, Mr. Eggleston?
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Weidman. I am, as always, glad to see a number of these in my district, District 1, where they are direly needed. And so just thank you to you. Thank you to all the folks who are bringing these opportunities forward to us. I love seeing that we are creating a mix of housing types, a mix of home ownership and rental, that creating opportunities for people to own their home. And I love seeing the longer affordability periods on some of the rental, but creating that generational wealth for people to pass down to their children and grandchildren through home ownership, I think is going to continue to be the way that we can mitigate displacement, mitigate a lot of the effects of gentrification as it relates to the people in our community. So very excited about that, and especially having our largest NOAA project to date, I think, is something we ought to be very, very excited about, and I am. And I'm glad that it's in an area of District 1 that is increasingly becoming more expensive to live in. So just thank you to everybody who continues to bring forward these great opportunities for us, and look forward to supporting these in 2 weeks.
Thank you, sir. Wendy, if you go to the last slide of the presentation for me, I talked about it, but I didn't. I just have that for your visual. I won't go through it.
Okay. All right. Anything else? Mr. Eggleston, you got it? Okay. Thank you. Take a screenshot, right? Okay. All right. I want to recognize Ms. Johnson.
Thank you. Do we have any idea the soonest that any of these projects will be available if approved?
So thank you, Ms. Johnson, for that. This is exactly the last slide. You are at the beginning stage, right? And so once you approve them, the next steps are it generally, the short answer is it takes 18 to 24 months, right, before they're on the ground. That is not the NOAAs, though. The NOAAs, the upgrades will begin as soon as the funding is approved and they get through the closing process. For the ones that are not going through the LIHTC process, which you all talked to us about several cycles ago, including those, they can go faster. But the ones that are going through the state, they will submit their approvals to the state. The state will approve. They'll get their closings. They'll begin the design and permitting, and then we'll deliver the unit. So those are the ones that are particularly the 18 to 24 months. Some of the others go sooner than that.
Do we have any plans that you know of, this is outside of this discussion, and do we have any plans for the individuals who are facing eviction? We know that we're going to have an influx of, I think the number was 23,000 evictions. Is there any consideration or that the city, do we have a plan or anything for those individuals so we avoid another tent city?
Yeah. So Ms. Johnson, you may recall that in preparation for what I think we believed was going to be an August 31st eviction, we sent you all a note to talk about the plan, right? And so in short, the plan that the city has is we continue to collaborate and partner with our colleagues in CRC so that they can get information out about our mediation services. We continue to partner with Dream Key. We've reprioritized how they are getting money out to people who are pending eviction. So if anybody has a court date, they are first in the priority. I won't remember all this off the top of my head, but we can resend that write-up out to you to talk about what our plans have been and what they continue to be for how we want to help our folks who are pending eviction.
And I think I asked, or I'd like an update, and I can get this from Mr. Jones, on the CRC numbers to make sure we're getting that information out.
Right. And we can just include that all in one big write-up for you so you'll have it all in one place.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Great job. I'm excited about these units, so thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for your support.
All right. Ms. Ajmira?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Well, I only have one question left. Ms. Whiteman, could you go to slide number 5?
Wendy, would you go back for me, please?
Well, while the slide is being pulled, Ms. Whiteman, I appreciate your work on bringing more NOAAs, especially the one that is 200 plus units. Certainly that is remarkable, where we are investing more in NOAA, which helps us keep residents from being displaced. And at the same time, it's more cost effective. So certainly appreciate staff's work on that.
Thank you. Is that the slide, Ms. Ashman?
Yeah, so let me just, okay, so the $32 million beginning balance, that was for 2021? Is that where we started?
So no, ma'am. So remember, we were here in April, I believe it was. You approved the 12 million plus the 3 plus the 2, so that's 15, 16, 17. But you approved those, so that's where you started. What I'm suggesting to you, the 37, is where we are starting today. And so should you approve all the ones I just presented to you, you will have a balance of $9 million left.
Okay. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ajmira. Mr. Winston?
Thank you very much. Mr. Jones, I know he usually doesn't like to do this, but he kind of put to me, is a bit of a bomb on the table in terms of things this body should consider. We work best, and what our real wheelhouse is thinking about policy level decisions and creating policy to automate practices and future decisions. This $9 million that is left over potentially not being enough to kind of go full-fledged on the 9% deals that would come next summer. Also understanding that it's great that we have so many different housing products that we're potentially going to be supporting with gap financing. That is exciting, but they present opportunity costs, right? That we're getting more expensive investments, for instance, in District 7 for 40 years. That's exciting. But when I see these numbers, I don't see how we can right now make an informed decision from a policy standpoint on the best way to administer these funds. Is it to spend it like this, or are we going to handicap ourselves from housing more people when these 9% deals come through next summer? So I'd like to see, is there a way that we can quantify as well as consider the opportunity costs of the way we are changing the way we invest in this in terms of, again, are we able to affect the affordable housing crisis in our city to the highest and best case scenario? So my question would be, can we get that kind of immediate opportunity cost data before we make our decision? I think it was the date was on September 27th. And also, again, I think we should put on the table as we go into the next budget process, as we consider in great neighborhoods, this is an important policy question that we have to consider. If we're going to start investing in home ownership and spending more on affordable housing in District 6 and 7, for instance, what do we need to be considering if $50 million is not enough? There's a lot of work that went into getting us to this point. So again, the information and the considerations that Mr. Jones put on the table, to me, it put bells and alarms up. So yeah, I think I'll stop talking, but if there's any type of response to that, I'd love to hear it.
So, Mayor, members of council, since I opened up the door, Pam, I'll try to step through it. So, Councilman Winston, I think there are a couple things that are going on, a couple of great things that are going on. We talked during this last budget process, and I remember we talked about it a great deal about tools in the toolbox, right? Anti-displacement. So there is, and these are just some numbers, there's a couple of $1 million that's left over from what we talked about housing from the FY20 budget. There's $7 million that's set aside in the current budget. And then as we started to talk about some of the ARPA funds, we thought there's an opportunity to take a big chunk of that and use it in this space. So I would say there's an opportunity to, I guess, create a gap between now and the next bond cycle. But what I wanted to put in the room is that I think the test of whether or not $50 million can be spent has been proven twice that it can be.
So what I'm hearing is you saying that there will be very minimal opportunity costs in the immediate for our decision. If we decide to approve all of this, there will be a minimal impact on our ability to deal with the 9% deals that are potentially going to come through to maximize, because those 9% deals are the ones that really do provide the most housing units per dollar spent. We should be good. Is that what you're saying?
I'll start off by saying that, and I'll ask Pam, but I think we typically have so many of the 9% that are afforded to Charlotte during that January timeframe. And the question that I'll throw out, is $9 million enough for the 9%? Maybe so, maybe not. Pam, it seems like that's maybe so. But then what I'm saying is that what you're doing right now, these 4% and some of the more innovative stuff, you may not have any funds for that through the Housing Trust Fund. But what I'm also saying is that you have some capacity within the budget that they're in your ARPA funds that potentially you could have $20 million that could build a bridge until the next bond cycle, which the placeholder right now is another $50 million.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right, Mr. Jones. And I want to be very clear. And I think what you are alluding to is for the 9%, for the 9%, we only do it once a year. 9 million will get us there because we're only going to get so many, our fair share. Mr. Jones, everything else he said, ditto. So
so that takes care of the immediate, something that we should consider keep an eye on. But what I'm hearing is that immediately those opportunity costs are going to be minimal. But I would hope that these ARPA funds or funds like ARPA funds are not around for a very long in the future over the next decade, because that would mean that this pandemic would persist for much longer than it should. So I again would say that this is a policy decision that we need to, this city council needs to start thinking about, as we are putting very good pressure on staff to think outside of the box, that we have to be willing to come to the table and do the hard work to consider, how do we fund these things moving forward, knowing that it is not, we don't have sufficient housing trust fund dollars to maintain the type of solutions that we want and that are needed to support our affordable housing crisis in the city of Charlotte. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Winston, for pointing out the connections between these decisions tonight and where we go forward. I think it's proven that this is a bucket that we can fill, and it's just a matter of how full do we want it, and that's a decision that we'll be doing in the future. So thank you. So with that, we do have a closed session plan. We're going to do that at the end of the meeting and go ahead and do a couple of things in advance. But I wanted to say before the meeting, and I think I've spoken with everyone, there were nominations planned for 3 committees that the council has recommended to begin new. These are new committees. They're nominations to the Arts and Cultural Advisory Board, nominations for the Charlotte Equitable Development Commission, and nominations to Charlotte Neighborhood Equity and Stabilization Commission. And it's called Charlotte's Nest. Because we have been so fortunate to have so many people apply for these positions, I thought it might be best that we take a little bit more time to review and understand who is applying, and also to clarify some of the procedures that we have around this process. And so what I'd like to do first is say that I would like to have this deferred until the October 4th strategy session for a decision. But in the meantime, I'd like to ask the clerk to state the process that we have since we've gotten nominations, advertised for nominations, and we've received nominations, who can be nominated, and if there's any door open for additional nominations. I'd like the clerk to address that, and I'd like the city attorney to do it, which applies to all of the commissions, but I'd like the city attorney to also address those that are specific to the Arts and Cultural Advisory Committee. So, Ms. Kelly?
Yes, ma'am. Mayor and council, the process for nominations to the 3 boards specifically that the mayor mentioned, the deadline was August the 27th. I would note that we received some applications after that August 27th deadline. And so those applications were not included among the ones that you received. The process for nominating anyone that you do not receive an application for, in accordance with the resolution that council approved on boards and commissions, you can still nominate someone that we don't have an application for. There is always an opportunity to write in that individual's name. However, you will also need to provide contact information to the clerk's office, because if we don't have a nomination, an application for them, we will reach out to them the next day to first confirm that they are interested in a nomination and obtain an application from them and explain to them the process for filling out an application online. So, well, I was just going to say, so that is the process for still receiving applicants whose applications we may not have.
And you said you, it meant each a council member, not global you, not the person, but council members have the ability to nominate from the floor. And I think that that would be good to do by a certain deadline if we decide to do, if anyone has a nomination like that. And I would suggest that that be October the 20th, which is next week, that you get the information to, is that October, sorry, September 20th by next week. But Mr. Bakari and Mayor Pro Tem have a question. Ms. Kelly.
Yeah, I guess, I mean, it's just more of a generic question about the process as a whole. We talked about it in the hallway earlier. I was always, as we were designing this kind of approach out, a big believer that the new Arts and Culture Commissioner role reporting to the city manager was the critical path of how this was going to evolve to be a great success or a failure. And that the right person being selected, which you've made an excellent choice, the right tools, resources, and infrastructure being put around them, but then this advisory board being a really critical part. So I'm just a really big believer when you bring in an executive to run something in a certain area, you make sure that the big strategic decisions they have a chance to weigh in on and don't get handed something that is ultimately a large chunk of how their success or failure is going to be. That person may look at all these candidates and decide to interview them and go through all that and list out for us what she needs in order to be successful, given to fill gaps where maybe her expertise isn't as strong as some others. So I'm just, a long story short, a big believer in that particular board, it being something that we wait until she is fully on board, has a chance to weigh in and tell us what she'd like. And then I think on the other ones, I mean, I agree, if there are more really truly legitimate candidates out there that would be willing to be considered, and we just haven't done enough on our size, or given the fact that it was summer and maybe people weren't paying attention, we give it another push. I'm more than happy to do that as well.
All right, Mr. Jones, do you want to address Mr. Bakari?
Yeah, thank you, Councilmember Bakari. So Priya did start today, and the conversation we had last week, she did mention how she thought she could be helpful in these selections. So you have no pushback from me in terms of having insight. And as we discussed, I think it's what you've alluded to, the types of members on a board that would be beneficial.
Okay. Mayor Pro Tem, followed by Mr. Newton.
Thank you. So two things. I'll just address that point first. I think what we could do is organize a ad hoc committee meeting of our Arts and Science Ad Hoc Council and have Priya come and introduce herself and just talk about her experience doing this in other cities or with other cities. And that would help inform us. So I think that's a great idea before we do make those final selections. So I will get with her and then get with you all. And of course, all council members are welcome to listen in on that meeting or attend it if it's in person. And then secondly, Madam Clerk, you had mentioned that some applications did come in after the deadline, and I know a few folks, or at least one, thought it came in before. So could you share those with us, those applications, just so that in case they are somebody that we would want to nominate separately, we would have the information from the application.
Yes, ma'am, I'll be happy to. One individual contacted us this afternoon, and I looked at his application, and it came in on August the 29th.
Okay.
So we'll go back and look at all of them that came in after.
And you can certainly let us know these came in after the deadline, but here they are and who they are. So thank you.
Sure.
All right, Mr. Newton?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So it came to my attention today that there might be some applicants for the Arts and Culture Commission that would be potentially prevented from our consideration due to, from what I understand, the concern being due to a potential conflict.
So I was going to get to that. Do you mind if we cover this part about working with the app, or if there are additional nominations? I don't know, Ms. Johnson, is your question concerning? Okay, so why don't we have the city attorney address the necessary requirements for members on the Arts and Culture Advisory Committee and the why there are requirements. This isn't arbitrary. There is a rationale because of the work that they're doing. So, Mr. Baker, would you go through the rationale and the guidelines, and then Mr. Winston, are you okay with that? I want to.
Absolutely. I was just agreeing with Mr. Bakari and Mayor Pro Tem.
Okay, thank you very much.
That suggestion.
Okay. All right, Mr. Baker?
So with this particular board, as I understand it, they will actually be making funding decisions. So it's not like they're making a recommendation.
Mr. Baker, if you can turn your mic on, please.
Can you hear me now? My green light's on. Okay, great. Sorry about that. So with this particular board, the way that it's set up is that they're actually making funding decisions. This isn't a situation where they're making a recommendation to the council who's making the funding decisions. They're making the funding decisions themselves. And the concerns that we had is similar to how we would be concerned if council was making funding decisions to fund one of your own individual companies or projects, is to disassociate the funders from the people that are soliciting the funds. So with this particular board, we've got a few things that we're going to require of them. Obviously, to get a look at our ethics policy that we've produced for them. We'll also asking for that to fill out a statement of economic interest. So that we've got clarity in terms of what their economic interest is, to make sure that there are no conflicts with this particular board. And also, when we haven't created this, and we'll certainly share with the group so you can see what we're asking, some sort of affidavit or some attestation that says that as a board member, they won't solicit funds from the board that they're actually making decisions on. It's just very important that the decision makers that are making the funding and the people getting the funding are separate and apart. And if someone anticipates soliciting funds from this board, that they should not be part of the decision-making team. They can make a presentation for those funds, but not be on the decision-making end of it. That's where we are with that.
Okay, so Mr. Newton?
I think that answers most of my question. So what I'm hearing, and please correct me if I'm wrong on this, Mr. City Attorney, what I'm hearing is that they're still eligible to sit on the board. They would just need to recuse themselves from decisions that could be considered conflicts.
They couldn't be a part of the board making the decision. It's very similar to the situation where if your firm was soliciting work here, it's not a recusal situation. You simply couldn't do it.
At all?
At all.
Even if there were decisions separate from anything, that they would have any sort of financial interest or alternatively sit on a board or be employed by an organization that would receive funds, they would just be prevented from any decisions across the board entirely?
That's what we have put into place to avoid the situation where there's a conflict of interest, where it appears that someone is there on the board to make sure that that individual's company or corporation is getting funding from the board, yes.
I guess my confusion lies in the fact that even us as council members, right? I mean, we fill out the form that you had mentioned, Mr. City Attorney, and we're asked to recuse ourselves from those particular, parse those particular decisions out, but that doesn't prevent us from being a part of the council and making decisions on other matters. So I'm just a bit confused by that, and would love to get some more information to clarify that. I guess why that would apply across the board, and to the extent that, that does present itself as an issue, is there a way for us to preliminarily determine that? I mean, we might not
May I make a
have that
suggestion?
information as council
Hey,
members.
Mr. Winston, he's not done yet.
We might not have that information as council members, and yet we're being asked to, select individuals. Would that be something that gets determined before the fact, after the fact?
I mean, I don't know that we've given it that much thought in terms of where we are. That's just been, between my office and the administration. Those were our recommendations in terms of avoiding the public's, losing the public's confidence in this board by essentially having people making their own decisions and having a close-knit group of individuals that are part of the decision-making process and receiving funds. And those have been our recommendations. So we haven't really thought beyond that in terms of highlighting those individuals.
I'd be interested in continuing the conversation because I guess I would assume that there would be decisions that would be made that would, stand alone from just maybe something where someone might be involved and could recuse themselves. And I would just want some further clarification on that. And maybe Councilmember Winston can
Well, no,
help me out on this too.
I've got a whole list here, so, all right. And we're going to start with Mr. Jones, then go to the Mayor Pro Tem, and then go to Mr. Winston, followed by Mr. Driggs. So if I've got that, Mr. Jones.
Okay, so thank you, and I think having Priya come in, if I hadn't said today is her first day, and provide some input is important too. The other thing that I'd like all of us to remember is that there will be a cultural plan that's a part of this process too, that talks about how money will come in and how money will be distributed. There are so many opportunities for people in this community to be engaged in the process. It's not necessarily limited to 6 appointments. So as we looked at different models, there could be groups that also inform what we're doing as opposed to just these 18 individuals. So I just wanted to put that out there also.
All right. Did you ask to speak, Ms. Johnson? Yes, I did. Okay, I think then Ms. Johnson was next and Mayor Pro Tem.
And it's a quick question. Since this opinion was recently decided upon, the applicants may not have been aware of that requirement. So are we going to post that on the website, or is there a way for applicants to understand that information, or we publicize it? Because there may be applicants that know they want to withdraw, which would make our pool smaller. So how are we coordinating that change?
Well, I think that if the ad hoc committee is going to meet to talk about some things, that could be one of the ideas that they would have to see, because I think that before it would be, if it's as a qualification, they would have to sign before they decided to come or to join the board. And it's not that you can't join, it's just that you agree that you would make that decision, and you could decide, it's a personal decision for the individual. So I believe it was optional on the form to write down what you did, or whether you were affiliated with an art. Is that correct? So there is some awareness that as the council's making their decision, and I think why we should go to committee, that they would have the ability to determine how best to inform that for people that are interested as well. But I think website, all of that's a good idea. Just making sure that we've had 122 applicants, I believe. So, Ms. Johnson, did you want to follow up?
So if Patrick maybe can send us a list, or Stephanie or someone can send us a list of applicants who might have a conflict of interest, so that we would know in our consideration. I think that would be fair for us, so that if there is someone that may not be able to serve, then we would know that when we're making our selection.
No, they would be able to serve. They just have to make a choice.
A choice
of
to do
this.
what?
Okay, so I run the arts organization, and I'm selected by the council to serve. I could decide not to do it or to do it. the constraint would be to not apply for grants because I am the person awarding the grants.
Right.
So you
most
would have a
people aren't-
choice.
So if I'm the CEO of an arts organization and I'm on the board, then I could no longer apply for
Not the
grants.
board. Wait a
Committee.
minute. Oh,
Right.
okay, I'm
You
sorry.
know
I
it,
thought you
yeah.
meant board and.
So most people aren't going to choose the board over their livelihood, or some people, but
some might.
Well, it's their choice. But what I'm saying is if we at least can be informed to know that that would be a consideration. Okay, I'd like to know.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Mayor Pro Tem?
Thank you. So first thing I was going to say, to respond to Matt, is what Mr. Jones said, is that most cities that have gone through this have had affinity groups that have come and presented to the board. So, and it could be that some folks just didn't want to commit for 3 years to do this board. They want to give feedback, and I think Priya will, I'm sure that'll be, you know, a specialty of hers is how to engage those folks in the conversation and not exclude them. But I'm pretty sure in the application process, they knew that this was a choice because everyone I spoke to, and our city clerk is nodding yes. And there is a column on there that says, are you a staff member of an organization that could get funding? And a lot of them did say yes. The ones that I called and spoke to, they were aware of it. Some said, I know, but I want to participate. It's important. And a couple did say, you know, I'm going to back out. I'm not going to do it. So I do think this gives us time just to clarify it so people know, while at the same time being really crystal clear, we want to give as many people the opportunity as possible to interact with this committee and be able to give feedback on it. I think the key difference with this is that they will be deciding how the fund will be spent. So they're going to be also drawing up the guidelines, whereas when we get asked for financial, to make financial decisions, the program's already been established. These folks are going to be creating the program. And so I think we want to be as above board and transparent as possible, that nobody in there is going to have the ability to influence it for their own organization. But now they're board members. I noticed a lot of those groups had board members that applied, and they can do that. A board member can. They just can't be a staff member of that organization if they also want to apply. But we'll explain that better. I think it deserves more conversation in the ad hoc committee.
Right, like in the committee, because a board member has more influence over an organization than a staff member does.
Not necessarily.
Okay.
All right, Mr. Winston?
Well, as the conversation goes on, it even gets a bit more, I don't want to say confusing, but certain details, it becomes clear that there are more details that need to get hammered out. I would add, Mr. Baker, do you think this is an issue of ethics or legal issues or both?
I think it's a perception issue, and something that my recommendation was to avoid having the entity that's doing the funding and the parties that are seeking funding being the same individuals. And that was my recommendation, was to avoid that perception of impropriety. So I would say it's more of a perception issue of an ethical challenge that may cost public support in the program if it's perceived as a group of individuals that are sort of funding themselves with city dollars.
So I think we do need to, as from the city of Charlotte, need to define some things. So we are dealing with a group of people that include artists. Artists tend to work in work structures, company structures even, that don't always meet neat terms, right? You can be sole proprietors. You can work in traditional business formations, but you might even work in collectives or in groups and pairs that come and go and come for certain projects. So I wonder if the people, not just us as council members who have to make choices about these folks, but as Ms. Johnson, who I think was referring to, the people that are putting themselves up for service, for public service, they might be due some type of professional interaction with legal or ethical advice. Because how are they to know if they're trying to give themselves up for service, whether they will be putting themselves, their livelihood, or perhaps the city in a bad situation because of the nature of their work, if that makes sense. So I'm wondering if there's any way for the city attorney and the city clerk to not wait for applicants to reach out to them, but to be proactive in reaching out to those folks to learn more about their situation, how they operate, how they do their business, and give them some advice about the wisdom of them serving on this board.
That's a fair assessment. I think that's the same thing Ms. Johnson was saying, awareness and knowledge that this is a choice, right? Okay, I have Mr. Driggs, followed by Ms. Watlington.
Thank you, Mayor. I think there is some lack of clarity, and I believe your explanation, Mayor, and that of the attorney were not exactly congruent. So, for example, is it intended that a board member, an uncompensated board member of an arts organization, should not be a member of this new group?
That was not my understanding, Mr. Driggs.
Mr. Attorney.
No, it's been my understanding, the concern that I have had is that an individual who's making a funding decision is benefiting from that funding decision. So I don't know that we ever parsed out the specifics of a non-compensated board member, sort of representative of a group versus a paid staff person whose salary will be part and parcel compensated through this process. I am happy to again work with the city manager and the city attorney on the city clerk on this particular matter, but that's been sort of my recommendation. And keep in mind, I'm not the one who's saying this is how it's going to be. It's just a recommendation to avoid what I think would be a potential appearance of impropriety that could be perceived in this process.
So I understand the purpose, but the truth is that a lot of these board members are also the most engaged and informed people. And if I consider how state law works, there has to be a financial interest in order for there to be a complete embargo. And the truth is, I have actually been appointed by mayors to the Blumenthal board and to the ASC board, both of which entities received funding from the city. And that was done, that's a formal arrangement, right, where you have a position on the board, a voting position on the board, but in the lack of any compensation to the board member, I don't see, at least from the standpoint of state law, an issue. And normally the way we would handle that and the way we do on council would be, for example, if there was a vote about funding for an entity of which I, as council member, am already a board member, I would recuse myself from the vote. And even then, there could be a challenge as to whether I was able to recuse myself from the vote under state law, given that I don't have a financial interest. And I think you know what I mean, Mr. Baker. The state law is pretty clear about when we're required to vote and when we may not vote. And the recusal process requires that you meet certain standards. And one of them is the appearance of impropriety, which would normally call for a council vote as to whether that recusal was indicated in a given situation. And once again, with our current mayor and past mayors, Mayor Lyles is a member of the Novant board, and we voted to recuse her on occasion in the past in issues related to that. So I do think we need to be clear here, and my particular concern is uncompensated board members not being allowed to be involved in the arts conversation because of their affiliation with one organization, which might or might not want to apply for a grant, and which, if it did, they should be able to just recuse themselves based on the fact that they aren't compensated. So I hope you'll study that a little further and that we can get some clarity around that. I don't know how many instances there are of people who are members of boards, but the truth is that members of this community could easily find themselves being asked to join boards while they're a member of this group. So we need to be crystal clear about what they can and can't do while they're a member of this group.
Mr. Driggs, Mr. Driggs, since you used me
Yes.
as an example, I would be eligible to be on the Arts Board because I would not be getting compensation for my salary. This is a different connection. So just like I serve on the Navant Board, it's a not-for-profit, it's not compensation, so I would be able to serve on the Arts Board. The discussion was narrowly around if you are a staff member and you have funding from the city that would go to the organization that would be a part of their operating budget. So it's not the board members. That was never included in this discussion. It was about whether or not, as a result of a decision to fund, it would be as a staff member where there would be a financial connection. But I think we're getting into the weeds, a lot of it, and I think that if everyone is okay, but I still have Ms. Watlington to call on.
Mayor, I have another question.
Oh, well, sure.
So for one, the suggestion that there might be a conflict issue would definitely attach to a board member. So if your intention is exactly what the city attorney intends, then I would like to get clear direction on that. The other thing, Mayor Rose, I'd suggested you before a procedural idea. I don't know if it's in order right now, but I'd like to just offer it to the full council as to how we move ahead with these nominations.
Well, I have Ms. Watlington on this discussion, so we'll come back to you. Ms. Watlington?
Sure. Much of it, I think the attorney already spoke to. I just wanted to clarify. You said ultimately this council has to decide what we want to do because it's not a legal issue. It's a propriety or some kind of appearance of impropriety issue, right?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So that said, I just want to say for my colleagues that I'm not necessarily opposed to someone who's getting funding sitting on the board if it is funding for programs, for instance. That doesn't hit their operating budget. And so I'd like to see some more options in terms of ways that we can meet the intent without creating a situation where we're losing a key voice at the table, because those organizations that are in this community and actually can tell us this is how we can best fund these things. I think there's a level of expertise that I don't want to be missing from the table if we can figure out how to get it done and still meet the intent. So that's all.
Ms. Ajmira?
Yes.
What's next?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So it's clear we do need more clarification and guidance from our city attorney. And we need to make a clear difference here between legal versus perception, where council comes to decide whether that's something acceptable for individual council member or not. So Mr. Baker, if you can provide clear guidance on that, that would be very helpful. I'm looking for legal guidance on this. Also, this question is for our city clerk. Are there any other local boards that makes or recommends funding decisions?
This board does not recommend the Arts and Culture Board would not recommend funding. They would actually award funding. And my understanding would be, from what I recall, the only boards that we have that have the ability to take local tax dollars to spend are those that have legislative authority. CRVA, for an example, would be one of those. They have the ability to have the hospitality taxes laid out in legislation and legally to do that. But I think the question here is not that they are recommending, because the council doesn't approve the way this board was set up, the arts and culture, is that they would actually be making the grant recommendations they would be making those recommendations. They would be awarding recommendations they would be awarding the funding, sorry. They would award
so the
money.
board will be awarding dollars.
Yes.
And the recommendations, it's not recommendations like other boards. So, so I guess my question then, so there are no other local boards that actually makes grant decisions. Is that correct?
Not that I'm aware of. we can go back and have the discussion with the committee. I think this is what, if everyone's comfortable with the ad hoc committee doing this review and making sure there's clarification, but I can't think of another board. Mr. Jones?
Yeah, Mayor, and never would I get in the way of council members trying to get more clarity. I just believe this going back to the ad hoc committee would clear up a lot of the questions that are being asked tonight, and I think some of the questions are not going to be able to be answered on the fly.
I agree, Mr. Jones. A lot of these questions are going to take some time and more work needs to be done, and that is clear. But I'm also interested in hearing from our city clerk and Mr. Jones, if there are any other boards and commissions that do have to make or are making grant decisions that we ought to consider, because this is the process that we need to set up for all boards moving forward if there is a potential conflict of interest. Also, I'm interested in at least knowing what the nominations are at this point. So, Madam Clerk, if you could also share those with us after the meeting. And lastly, I think Mr. Winston and Ms. Johnson had discussed this earlier or had raised this, where I'm interested in hearing us being more proactive and getting commitment if the funding is an issue and it becomes a conflict of interest, getting some sort of commitment that they are not going to apply for any funds as long as they serve on the board. So that helps us making decisions on who should be on the board and not. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ashmira. So there was this, I'm not sure a recommendation, but our motion to refer this issue of, I'm sorry.
Mr. Driggs.
Mr. Driggs?
No, Mayor, my hand was still up. I'm fine.
Okay, so may I have a motion to refer the questions raised by the council regarding requirements for membership for the Arts and Cultural Board to be addressed by the Ad Hoc Committee of Arts and Culture? Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All right, so let's have a roll call here. Ms. Ashmira?
Yes.
Mr. Phipps?
Yes.
Mr. Winston?
Yes.
Mr. Bakari?
Yes.
Mr. Driggs?
Yes.
Mr. Eggleston?
Yes.
Mr. Graham? Ms. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Newton?
Yes.
Ms. Watlington?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem?
Yes.
So that passes, so we'll make sure that you get all those questions and get the advice of the right team of people. Ms. Ajmira, I think that what we were asking is a deferral for the items the nominations for the Arts and Cultural Board, nominations for the Equitable Development Commission, and nominations for the Charlotte's Nest until the strategy session on October the 4th. That will allow the ad hoc committee to do this. So is there any objection to deferring these items until October the 4th?
I don't have any objection.
I'm sorry, Ms. Ajmir, I didn't hear what you said.
She said she didn't
I
have.
said I don't have any objections.
So with that, then we'll defer these items to October the 4th and have the ad hoc committee do more additional work. Okay. So now we can go back to our agenda. Those who are watching us, sometimes it just takes a moment to get it all done and said, but we are moving forward on our next item on our agenda, and it is, we're now going to open a public hearing. Madam Clerk, do we have any speakers?
No, ma'am.
We do have someone on item number 9 that is available for questions if there are any from the council. So this is item number 9, public hearing and decision on Edgewood Preserve Area Voluntary Annexation Action. We're conducting a public hearing. There are no speakers. May I have a motion to close the public hearing?
Move to close.
Second.
All right, all in favor of closing the public hearing. Ms. Ajmira?
Yes.
Mr. Phipps?
Yes.
Mr. Winston?
Yes.
Mr. Bakari?
Yes.
Mr. Driggs?
Yes.
Mr. Eggleston?
Yes.
Mr. Graham?
Yes.
Ms. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Newton?
Yes.
Ms. Watlington?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem?
Yes.
All right. Now do I have a motion to adopt an annexation ordinance with the effective date of September 13, 2021 to extend the corporate limits to include these properties and assign them to the adjacent City Council District 4?
So moved.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Hearing no discussion, Ms. Ajmira?
Yes.
Mr. Phipps?
Yes.
Mr. Winston?
Yes.
Mr. Bakari?
Yes.
Mr. Driggs?
Yes.
Mr. Eggleston?
Yes.
Mr. Graham?
Yes.
Ms. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Newton?
Yes.
Ms. Watlington?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem?
Yes.
That passes. The next item is item number 10, conduct a public hearing for the Riverbend Phase 3 and 2 area voluntary annexation. Madam Clerk, do we have any speakers?
No, ma'am.
Hearing none, do I have a
Move to
motion
close.
to close the public
Second.
hearing?
Second.
Driggs said.
Mr. Driggs. Okay. Mr. Driggs made the motion, and I can't remember who seconded.
Mr. Newton.
All right, thank you. All right, may I have a roll call vote? Ms. Ajmira?
She said yes.
All right,
Yes.
Mr. Phipps?
Yes.
Mr. Winston?
Yes.
Mr. Bakari?
Yes.
Mr. Driggs?
Yes.
Mr. Eggleston?
Yes.
Mr. Graham?
Yes.
Ms. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Newton?
Yes.
Ms. Watlington?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem?
Yes.
All right. Now, may I have a motion to adopt an annexation ordinance with an effective date of September 13, 2021, to extend the corporate limits to include these properties and assign them to the adjacent City Council District 2?
So moved. Driggs.
Second, Ajmira.
All right, thank you very much. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, we'll begin the vote. Ms. Ajmira?
Yes.
Mr. Phipps?
Yes.
Mr. Winston?
Yes.
Mr. Bakari?
Yes.
Mr. Driggs?
Yes.
Mr. Eggleston?
Yes.
Mr. Graham?
Yes.
Ms. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Newton?
Yes.
Ms. Watlington? Yes. Mayor Pro Tem? All right, before we go to the policy, the city manager's report, do you have one?
Very short, Mayor.
Okay, I want to go back and do our awards and recognitions tonight. I'm going to read the proclamation for Hispanic Heritage Month, and it will be followed being read in Spanish by the Mayor Pro Tem. So let's start with our first proclamation. Whereas for decades, Americans have observed National Hispanic Heritage Month from September 15th to October 15th by celebrating the histories, culture, and contributions of American citizens who are residents of Hispanic origin from Mexico, Central America, South America, the Caribbean, and Spain. And whereas in September 1968, this was proclaimed as National Hispanic Heritage Week. And whereas every year the United States Congress and the White House call for public officials, educators, librarians, and all Americans to observe National Hispanic Heritage Month. Whereas Charlotte's Patriotic Celebrations and Traditions Committee, also known as Fiestas Patrias, is commemorating National Hispanic Heritage Month for the 7th consecutive year in our own city. And whereas Mecklenburg County is home to 153,000 Latinos, and whereas the City of Charlotte recognizes the extraordinary contributions made to this community by immigrants, residents, and citizens of Latino origin, now therefore I, Vi Alexander Lyles, Mayor of Charlotte, do hereby proclaim September 15th through October 15th, 2021 as Hispanic Heritage Month in Charlotte and commend its observance to all citizens. Right?
Considerando que décadas los estadounidenses han observado el Mes Nacional de la Herencia hispana de 15 de septiembre al 15 de octubre, celebrando las historias, culturas y contribuciones de los ciudadanos estadounidenses que son residentes de origen hispano de México, Centroamérica, Suramérica, el Caribe y España. Y considerando que en septiembre de 1968, el Congreso y el presidente Lyndon B. Johnson proclamaron la Semana Nacional de la Herencia Hispana, y considerando que cada año el Congreso de los Estados Unidos y la Casa Blanca convocan a los funcionarios públicos, educadores, bibliotecarios y todos los estadounidenses a observar el Mes Nacional de la Herencia Hispana, y considerando que el Comité de Tradiciones y Celebraciones Patrias de Charlotte, también conocido como Fiestas Patrias, está conmemorando el Mes Nacional de la Herencia Hispana por 7º año consecutivo en Charlotte, y considerando que el condado de Mecklenburg es el hogar de 153,000 latinos, y por cuanto la ciudad de Charlotte reconoce las contribuciones extraordinarias hechas a esta comunidad por inmigrantes, residentes y ciudadanos de origen latino. Ahora, por lo tanto, yo voy a Alexander Lyles, alcaldesa de Charlotte, proclamamos el mes de 15 de septiembre al 15 de octubre de 2021 como mes de la herencia hispana.
And with this proclamation, I ask Federico Rios, who is the head of our diversity, inclusion, and immigrant community, to go to the podium if you'd like to say something, and to give us some comments about why this is important, and know that we will provide this to your office, both in Spanish form as well as English.
Thank you so much, Madam Mayor, Madam Mayor Pro Tem. Excellent reading of the proclamation in Spanish. We have a large Latino community, a robust community that makes up a large portion of Charlotte. Our last census count showed that we are a hyper-growth community for Latino population in the U.S., and so we recognize those individuals that enrichen and make our community better by their very presence, their contributions on the business, education, and civic participation portions of our community. And so we're grateful to the large Latino community, which I am incredibly proud to represent today.
Thank you so much, Mr. Rios. I have to say, from the work that was done by this council on the immigration issues and the community, you guys are doing a fantastic job carrying that mission and an agenda forward. So thank you very much. We'll get you a copy of the official proclamation so that you may present it to whomever you would suggest, okay? All right, so we now are going to have Councilmember Newton do a proclamation on Suicide Prevention Month. Mr. Newton.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This past Friday was World Suicide Prevention Day, and I am very honored to deliver this proclamation tonight. I did want to acknowledge Fonda Bryant, who is not only the preeminent suicide awareness and prevention advocate here in Charlotte, but the preeminent suicide prevention and awareness advocate throughout the country. She was recently awarded the national recognition as the Next Star Remarkable Woman of the Year for her advocacy. If you, like me, have noticed our buildings here in Uptown lit up in teal and purple over this past week in observance of Suicide Prevention Day and Suicide Awareness Month, that was because of her. And most recently, she's also been involved working with James Brown, not the Godfather of Soul, but the James Brown who is on the host of Fox NFL Sunday and NFL on CBS. She's been working with him on some national public service announcements to address this issue as well. She is, simply put, a remarkable woman and advocate. Tonight's proclamation is a reflection of her tireless work on this, and I just wanted to take that moment to thank her before moving forward. So without further ado, the proclamation. Whereas suicide is the 10th leading cause of death in the United States and the second leading cause of death among individuals between the ages of 10 and 34, an increase of 35.2% since 1999, And whereas in the United States, one person dies by suicide every 11 minutes, resulting in over 47,511 Americans dying by suicide every year. And whereas more people die by suicide in the United States than car deaths and homicides combined, and over 132 Americans and over 22 veterans die by suicide daily, with suicide deaths being underreported. And whereas for each completed suicide, there are 25 attempts, with over 3,800 Americans attempting suicide daily, bringing close to 1.4 million people attempting suicide every year. And whereas suicide should be declared a health crisis, a national health crisis, every 6 hours someone in North Carolina dies by suicide. And whereas depression is the #1 disease that can cause a suicide, a treatable mental health condition, but due to the stigma that surrounds having a mental health condition, people don't seek help. And whereas suicide is everybody's business, and anyone can prevent the tragedy of suicide by simply caring and getting educated, organizations and advocates envision a world without suicide and are dedicated to saving lives and providing hope to those affected by suicide through education, research, advocacy, and resources for those who have lost someone to suicide. Now, therefore, our illustrious mayor, Vi Alexander Lyles, the mayor of Charlotte, do hereby proclaim September 2021 as Suicide Prevention Month.
Thank you, Mr. Newton, and thank you, Ms. Bryant, for the work that you do. It is a major health care and mental health issue, so thank you very much for the work that you do in this community to make this a preventable issue for us. Okay, with that, we will go to item number 11, the city manager's report.
Thank you, Mayor, members of council. I'll be brief. So I believe at your desk there's a 30-day memo, and what we have for September 27th is a Safe Charlotte update. We believe it will be a robust update that is about a year since the Safe Charlotte plan went into place. We talked about this at the previous meeting to give you an ARPA update as well as a closed session as necessary. At the strategy session, we will add the nominations for the 3 groups that we talked about tonight. With that also, there's a Vision Zero update. And then on October the 11th, we would have, as we had mentioned earlier, coming back monthly with an update on the UDO and Charlotte Future 2040. And I guess we had a little bit of a glitch on the manager's report, which states the Picasso update. So I'll take that glitch to give you a very quick update. So it's great to have Priya Sakara on board as our Arts and Culture Officer. She began today virtually, but she and her family are well on the way to coming here to Charlotte. And one of the things that's happening, one of the great things is there's a lot of collaboration between the city and the county, and you saw that tonight with the Housing and Homeless 2025 plan, the things we're trying to do with ARPA funds, the Violence Interrupter program, even Memorial Stadium. One of the things that there's been a discussion about is to have a Picasso exhibit here at the Mint Museum, and it's a rare opportunity for the city to host a major international exhibition of Picasso. It's set to have a very limited U.S. tour, and we will have Todd Herman, the president and CEO of the Mint Museum of Art, come to present both to the council as well as to the County Board of Commissioners. But I will say that we're pretty excited about this, and Dina and I, the county manager, have been discussing. There is an ask, and the ask is $500,000 between the city and the county in order to secure this very limited and special exhibit. So I just say that he will come and brief both, again, the board and the council, but I wanted to at least put that on your radar.
All right, any questions for the manager, Mr. Phipps?
Which Mint campus are we talking about? Which Mint Museum campus will this be housed?
This is, which one do we have it at?
think
Randolph.
you
Yes. Yes.
Mr. Bakari?
What's the difference between going after this deal and the exclusivity of going after and having won the Van Gogh exhibit, which had a huge economic impact to it? Tom Gabbert, the folks there did a great job. I don't recall, did we have to incentivize that in any way?
I would say, I'm sorry, I would say that this one is very different, and I don't want to get out in front of Todd on this one. When I say very limited, 3 cities in the United States, and this would be the kickoff. So this is something super special that with public investment, we believe we can pull it off.
I would just validate, because the Van Gogh exhibit is very exclusive as well. I mean, that's Charlotte is one of the very few that ended up getting that. So if I like this path, I like Charlotte having these things. I just think that we have to set the right tone for, if we can get one in one way, well, what can we learn from that so that we don't end up subsidizing what ultimately become great money-making opportunities for our organizations?
Yeah, I don't disagree at all, and I think some of the things that are important in this would be free tours, complimentary exhibits, and something that's special, that's unique for Charlotte.
I think I'm sorry, Ms. Watlington.
Just as a follow-up to what you were saying, that's kind of what I'm wanting to understand is what is the ROI for the public? So I'd like to see that a little bit more hashed out to have an understanding of if, I'm assuming we would be putting up $250,000 if we in the county are both responsible for a total of $500,000. So I'd just like to understand what's the return on investment for the public?
Sure.
I think these kinds of things are really important, and the return on investment should be there. I don't know how many of you lived in Charlotte when we had the King Tut exhibit, but every kid in every elementary school walked through that museum, and there was actually, this is how, I mean, we've grown up a lot, but there was actually a parade of students in acting out the whole Egyptian theme and history. And there was a parade in Center City that they all participated in, and every arts and cultural group had all kinds of tremendous experiences. So I hope that there is a rationale that's a return on the investment that really is community engagement, especially around education for our kids, and participation for our Center City and visitor nights and rooms and things like that. Because that exhibit, King Tut was here for a month, and you couldn't get on Randolph Road at the time. And the idea of closing a street for a parade just to celebrate an art exhibit, I think is pretty cool, even if it's Picasso. So, okay. Mayor Pro Tem?
I just want to mention real quickly, too, that I think what Todd could explain is the funding model is so different between the Blumenthal and between the Mint Museum. The Van Gogh is something that can be replicated in other cities, and the Blumenthal had to make a big investment in that, and they can. The Mint Museum, these are actual Picassos, they're originals, the insurance is completely different, and so it is a different model when it comes to an arts exhibit, and I hope that he'll be able to explain that to us a little bit better as to why they would look for that support to be able to do that. And as Mayor said, there's lots of opportunities for us to say, this is the community benefit that we would like from that.
So we look forward to that. And I think you're great questions and what that means for us.
I've been watching a lot of heist videos on Netflix lately, and I feel like this is really a solid tee up.
I was going to bring it up, but I said, nah.
Okay, let's go on to the next item on our agenda. Our next item, Mr. Jones, do you have anything else? All right, let's go to item 12, accept a grant in the amount of $40,000 from the Cities of Financial Empowerment Fund to continue the Financial Navigators Program and adopt a budget ordinance appropriating $40,000 from the Cities for Financial Empowerment Fund and $20,000 from the General Operating Fund and Neighborhood Development Grants Fund. Do I have a motion?
Approve A and B.
All right, Mr. Driggs, do I have a second? All right, Mr. Phipps, any discussion? Hearing no discussion. Any discussion? I don't have anyone. Mrs. Hashimura?
Yes.
Mr. Phipps?
Yes.
Mr. Winston?
Yes.
Mr. Bakari? Mr. Driggs?
Yes.
Mr. Eggleston?
Yes.
Mr. Graham?
Yes.
Ms. Johnson? Yes. Mr. Newton?
Yes.
Ms. Watlington?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem?
Yes.
That approved unanimously. Item 13, approve a 5-year reimbursable agreement with Crescent River District for the construction of a portion of Beaver Dam Sanitary Trunk Sewer Project, and B, adopt a budget ordinance appropriating $900,000 from the Crescent River District LLC to the Charlotte Water Capital Projects Fund. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Ms.
Second.
Watlington and Mr. Driggs. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, we'll start our vote. Ms. Hashimura?
Yes.
Mr. Phipps?
Yes.
Mr. Winston?
Yes.
Mr. Bakari? Mr. Driggs?
Yes.
Mr. Eggleston?
Yes.
Mr. Graham?
Yes.
Ms. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Newton?
Yes.
Ms. Watlington?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem?
Yes.
Item 14, introduce a bond order authorizing the issuance of general obligation refunding bonds not to exceed $150 million. Adopt a resolution making certain statements of facts concerning the proposed bond issue, and set a public hearing regarding these bonds for September 27, 2021. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
A second?
Second.
All right, Mr. Driggs and Mr. Newton. All right, is there any discussion? Hearing no discussion, Ms. Hashimura?
Yes.
Mr. Phipps?
Yes.
Mr. Winston?
Yes.
Mr. Bakari?
Yes.
Mr. Driggs?
Yes.
Mr. Eggleston?
Yes.
Mr. Graham? Ms. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Newton?
Yes.
Ms. Watlington?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem?
Yes.
Item 15, adopt a resolution approving a 5-year lease agreement with the Charlotte Center City Partners Community Trust for a 2020 Ford Transit 250 cargo low roof van for the operation and maintenance of the Joyrides bike sharing system. B, adopt a budget ordinance appropriating $28,341.60 from the Charlotte Center City Partners Community Trust, and authorize the manager to negotiate and execute all documents necessary to complete the agreement. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All right. Is there any discussion? Hearing no discussion, Ms. Hashimura?
Yes.
Mr. Phipps?
Yes.
Mr. Winston?
Yes.
Mr. Bakari?
Yes.
Mr. Driggs?
Yes.
Mr. Eggleston?
Yes.
Mr. Graham?
Yes.
Ms. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Newton?
Yes.
Ms. Watlington?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem?
Yes.
Passes unanimously. Item 16 is adopt a resolution ratifying an interlocal agreement with the University of North Carolina at Charlotte, now known as Charlotte, to extend the law enforcement authority of the University of North Carolina at Charlotte Campus Police.
Move to adopt.
Ms. Johnson, Mr. Driggs seconds that motion. Is there any discussion? Mr. Phipps?
Yeah, do we know how far from the immediate Charlotte campus does the UNCC Police Authority extend?
I did not know the answer to that question. Okay, who's up for the question? I hear someone coming.
Is that Mr. Sell?
All right, Ms. Harris, there.
I'll take it if you want.
We have, Wendy, if you turn on CH14, well, I see you do, so we should have somebody from police making their way to the podium. We have Major Foley available, and I believe we have another, and I forgot the captain's name, is available on the WebEx as well. Is that the captain right there? Oh, thank you. Thank you. This is Major Foley.
All right, who's up for this? Oh, hi. I kept I was only looking at the screen. You know, that's what you end up doing. So yes, please.
Good evening, Madam Mayor, members of council. I'm Major Brian Foley with Charlotte Mecklenburg Police North Patrol Bureau. So just to address Mr. Phipps' question, the territorial jurisdiction, there is a map that should be an attachment to what you have. Generally, we look at about a radius of about a mile outside their territorial jurisdiction. What this does, and again, this is not a new agreement, this is a renewal of an existing agreement that's been in place for 15 years. It's generally updated to provide the new chancellor's name. Also, Chief Jennings is on this document. Again, the purpose of this is to allow UNCC police to assist CMPD in certain specific instances when we respond to or dealing with situations with students that are off campus, generally in off-campus housing. That's the biggest part of this whole agreement, is to make sure that we're managing that well, so that when students are involved in a situation, for example, where an offense occurs and a law is broken, the UNCC police can come and assist CMPD with that. Generally, that gives us another tool in our toolbox, if you will, because UNCC police are allowed and available to enforce campus code of conduct violations. So oftentimes, if an officer is going to issue a citation for something related to, for example, a drug offense or an assault, that also violates the campus code of rules. And so those students can be expelled, up to expellment for that. So it's very helpful for us. We've had a great working relationship with Chief Baker, with UNCC Police, and also the administration of UNCC. The primary focus of this document is to ensure that we keep UNCC students safe both on and off campus.
Okay, and in the agenda package, the map, the whole map is on page 42 of 131, and then there are individual cubes of each section of that, I believe. So it must...
Yeah, so to the extent that the radius is 1 mile, 1 mile from the immediate campus, how about those so-called student housing complexes that may extend beyond 1 mile? Are there any individually, specifically named student housing complexes within the scope of this agreement that might be outside of that 1 mile limit from the campus?
I do not believe that there are. However, if CMPD officers respond to one of those locations and we determine that a UNCC student is either a victim or a person that's committed a crime, we will contact UNCC police, and in most cases they can respond to our location to assist us with whatever investigation we have to conduct, or again, from a reciprocal viewpoint, us being able to provide information to them about that student's conduct.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Phipps. Thank you, Major, I'm not going to make you a sergeant, Major Foley. Thank you very much.
Yes, ma'am.
All right. The next item on our agenda is item number 17, to adopt a resolution and close a portion of Closeburn Road. Did we vote on we did not vote on 16. You're right, I do not have that. All right, is there any further discussion on the Charlotte agreement? Okay, Ms. Ajmira?
Yes.
Mr. Phipps?
Yes.
Mr. Winston?
No.
Mr. Bakari?
Yes.
Mr. Driggs?
Yes.
Mr. Eggleston?
Yes.
Mr. Graham?
Yes.
Ms. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Newton?
Yes.
Ms. Watlington?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem? Yes. All right. Thank you very much. Item number 17 is to adopt a resolution and close a portion of Closeburn Road. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Mr. Driggs made a motion. Do I have a second? All right, Mr. Graham. Is there any discussion about closing a portion of Closeburn Road? Hearing no discussion, Ms. Ajmira?
Yes.
Mr. Phipps?
Yes.
Mr. Winston?
Yes.
Mr. Bakari?
Yes.
Mr. Driggs?
Yes.
Mr. Eggleston?
Yes.
Mr. Graham?
Yes.
Ms. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Newton?
Yes.
Ms. Watlington?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem?
Yes.
All right, with that, tonight, the council is making appointments to boards and commissions. The council members vote by ballot and submit their ballots to the clerk earlier today, and any nominee receiving 6 or more votes is automatically appointed. If no nominee receives 6 votes, or at least 6 votes, a runoff is necessary, and the council vote will be asked to vote determine the highest vote getter. That person will be appointed to the board. All appointments will be recorded in the official minutes of this meeting. The clerk will now proceed announcing the results of the ballots, the appointments to the Community Relations Committee, the Waste Management Advisory Board.
Yes, Mayor and Council, for the Community Relations Committee, Anthony Foreman received seven votes. And for the Waste Management Advisory Board, we will bring that back to you at the next meeting. There is a 3-3 tie for Laura Cupo and Lisa Rudisell. And for the Charlotte International Cabinet, Sven Gerzer received 9 votes. And the others have been deferred until
All right.
the 4th.
Okay. Now I need the motion to go into closed session. Mr. Attorney, would you?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. We need a motion to go into closed session pursuant to GS 143-318-11A3 to consult with the city attorney in order to preserve the attorney-client privilege between the attorney and the city council in the matter of Watts versus City of Charlotte.
Do I have motion?
So moved.
Second.
And Mr. Guderick's and Mr. Newton, any discussion? Hearing none. Ms. Ajmira?
Yes.
Mr. Phipps?
Yes.
Mr. Winston?
Yes.
Mr. Bakari?
Yes.
Mr. Driggs?
Yes.
Mr. Eggleston?
Yes.
Mr. Graham? Yes. Ms. Johnson? Yes. Mr. Newton?
Yes.
Ms. Watlington?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem?
Yes.
All right, so, Ms. Jackson, how do you want us to go into closed session now?
Sure. There was a link sent earlier today. It'll say closed session. It started at 6:30. You can just join that meeting.